When you wake up in the morning, as you're going from sleep to wakefulness, there's a massive shift in neurochemistry and brainwave activity. And if you don't manage that moment, you can...
What was the biggest challenge for you to overcome mentally with your messy mind that was holding you back? You know, something that took a long time for you to finally okay, I know the science, I know the research, I've been teaching this, but I still haven't been able to do this myself. What's that been for you?
Two things: the complaining in the morning, waking up very negative in the morning. And that
How long were you doing that for?
Oh, for years. I remember what it was like all through the first few years of our marriage. And I remember at high school too, I'd wake up in the morning like on edge and anxious. And so for years. And I remember one day my husband saying to me, we'd been married for about maybe 10 years or something. And he turned around and said to me, "You are always so negative in the morning." And he wakes up bright and happy and go away. "You're too happy for me in the morning." You know, it's like it was, and he just said, "You're always negative in the morning." And I didn't, until he pointed that out to me, I hadn't realized I was doing it. But it affected the first half of my day and would keep me in a kind of negative state. And here I'm doing all this brain research. And as soon as I did the research, I'm like this, I would go into a high because it immediately, as soon as my work immediately changed things because it's brain building. And that's really important for mental health. Brain building is something that we definitely need to explore in this discussion because it's phenomenal. Okay. Anyway, so complaining was set because it basically creates neurochemical chaos. Now, when you wake up in the morning, as you're going from sleep to wakefulness, there's a massive shift in neurochemistry and brainwave activity. And literally things that were flowing this way now flow that way. And the brainwaves all, like delta is very high, and now suddenly it drops down, and theta will change, and the beta comes on board. And so there's a whole shifting pattern. And if you don't manage that moment, you can set yourself up for failure for the whole day or a miserable day. And everything just becomes so much harder. So it's just a matter of mind managing it. And I trained myself. It took me multiple cycles of 63 days using the neurocycle to train it. But it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. It honestly took me about, I think it was 2 cycles, if I stand corrected, 2 cycles. So it's 18 weeks, which is not that long if you think I've been doing it for maybe 20 years. Right. And the other thing that held me back, which I've been doing from a child as well, was if only. I used to say if only to everything. And I used to lose them.
If only I would have got this opportunity, if only this wouldn't have happened to me, if only whatever.
If only I said it this way, if only I did it that way, if only we had this much more time on this holiday, if only. And one day, one of my daughters, and I've got 4 kids, and my second daughter, 3 of my daughters actually work for me. The one who's my producer, Dominique, turned around to me and she said, "Mom, you are spoiling this holiday," because I was going on about all the if onlys as we were leaving the holiday. And it was, once again, it took a person close to me to actually turn on and say, I wish you'd stop. And it was a child. I was like, gosh, I'm having this impact on my child. Wow. And I went into and that took me much longer because I had been doing it for so long. And that was, even now on my, I have an app called the Neurocycle app, and it's on iTunes and Google Play. And it's literally me giving you therapy, taking you through the neurocycle. I use that every day. I know the system off by heart, but I use the active reach reminders because you can type it in. And every day, 7 times a day, still, it pops up on my phone. Remember your if onlys. So I no longer do it, but I still remind myself. And I now can just glance and remember, and I can catch myself like that. So I've become 81% more effective in managing something that was so toxic to my mental health that it has completely revolutionized my life. I cannot tell you how that's changed my life.
I can imagine when we come from a place of if only, what is that saying about us and our life?
That nothing will ever satisfy you. Wow. Nothing will ever give you peace. You will always be looking for the grass is greener on the other side.
Man, that sounds exhausting.
It's exhausting. You constantly can't see what you've got because you're always thinking what you just lost and how it would have been better. I think a level of, once I did the work, it came from a desire to be perfect, perfectionism, which comes from a very poor identity, basically, and me to prove myself. I was the youngest of 4 kids. I had a pretty...
Me too.
Okay. So I had my 2 elder sisters. My family are amazing, but like any family, every family has crazy things going on, which is very normal too. That's something that we all need to kind of realize. Obviously not the extreme stuff. That's not normal. But my 2 elder sisters were really battled a lot, and and I was the youngest, and I was kind of had to prove myself, and so I went out in every aspect, from academics to sport, and I was always the top academic and the top sports, and I drove myself to a point where it was just too much, and I was always trying to please. And my mom was very British and very, you don't compliment children, you don't give them a big head, you don't. So I remember going up to her as a little child, and she knows the story, so she's good with it, and we've talked this through, and I have a great relationship with her. But I was maybe 6 or 7, and I drew this picture, and I went up to her and I said, Mommy, don't you love my picture? And she said to me, that's vain. Don't ask me. Don't look for compliments. And it shattered me. And from
At 6
that
or 7, that's tough.
Yeah, it shattered me. It completely, and she wasn't intending to shatter me, but it shattered me. From that day, I never asked. I just proved, and I drove myself, and it was never good enough. Nothing was ever good enough because she never complimented me. Wow. Now, as an 85-year-old, she never stops because she's changed and she's apologized. And she said, I realized I didn't, because she started doing it to my kids and being hard on them. And I said, no. I said, because she said, you compliment your kids too much. I said, you never complimented me enough. I said, my kids, when they do something that's great, I am going to be their biggest cheerleader. And she saw that, and we had this whole discussion around that, but that's where it came from. And now it's sorted out. Now she makes a point of like everything. It's like really sweet now. She's trying to make up for it, which is great because you can forgive and forget. You can't change what's happened to you, but you can change what's in you. But that's where it came from. And once I had made peace with that, it definitely, once my mom and I had that discussion, it freed me. It was definitely a massive part of my healing.
Wow. How impactful does perfectionism, or how impactful is perfectionism on the brain in holding people back? And how does someone let go of this idea to be perfect when they feel like maybe they had something similar with you, or they feel like that they need to be perfect to be loved or accepted or get acknowledgement or attention or affection or whatever it is? What does perfectionism do to the brain, and how do we let go of it?
That's an excellent question. It's very distorted because it goes against your natural wide flow of nature. Because when you are, and it's all to do with identity. So it's all to do with, and when we talk about identity, we've got to talk about it as a verb as opposed to a noun. It's something that's organic and growing. So you are Lewis, but you're constantly growing and changing from life experiences. When you're growing into yourself and you're growing, and as we go through messiness and repair and growth, it's enhancing and growing and getting better and better all the time. And perfectionism is a sort of non-acceptance of that. It's like, I haven't had a chance to really see that my identity is good enough. And so it's like you've got to always do something. And there's something that's happened. It's generally, you can't, everyone's got their own narrative, but at some point in our lifetime, we've had something that knocked us. And it seemed to be for me that was where that knock happened. Mm-hmm. And so that, growing up in that kind of environment when there was never any compliments, and not a child needs that sort of thing. So it affected my identity. I always felt like I had to prove myself in every instance. And it became a very big thing. I was like living for approval until I could accept who I was. So perfectionism, what it does.
You never accepted yourself, probably.
No, not totally. And and I think a lot of us battle with that. Identity is one of those I always recommend that people do regular identity checks, that you go and at least once a year you do a full-on identity check and just find out that you haven't been, because it's so easy to be shaped by experience and because it's nature, nurture, and I factor. There's the nature part of identity that is, you have your genetic makeup, I have mine. You have your own unique way that your proteins vibrate. They don't vibrate the same way as mine. Even though we have the same brain structures, we have different protein vibrations and the way that our proteins fold. I mean, I held up this tree before. The thoughts that you build look like trees. The roots are the source, but the branches are your interpretation. So every listener listening to this now, they're hearing the same source, so the same roots that they grow in their brain, but every single person is growing their own interpretation, their own thoughts, feelings, and choices around the content we're talking about, and that's identity. So those are proteins, and the vibrations are different. So our wiring is unique, nurture-wise. Nature-wise, nurturing, we have our environment impacts us, whether we like it or not. Culture, religion, where we live, the philosophies of the day, all of that impacts us. But overriding both of those is the I factor, and that's your growing identity.
The perception we have of ourselves.
Yes.
What we look like in the mirror.
What we look like in the mirror and how we perceive the world. And that is very malleable. It's very strong, but it's very vulnerable too. Mm-hmm. And it gets very very strongly influenced by nature, nurture. And that's why it's so important that we build an identity. So people that are confident, people that seem to get like no matter what happens, they just seem to bounce back. Even they will have identity issues, but they've reached a point in their life where they can bounce back quicker, maybe than someone else who's got more identity issues who gets crushed. So for me, that was when I was still practicing, I would spend a large portion of my work with my patients on identity, because most of the time their first would be the first sort of thing that I'd work on. And then I would do brain building, and then I'd do emotional work. So it would be to first build the person. This, you're amazing. This is how we get resilience in your brain. And you asked earlier on about how do we bring brain health. Brain building is one of the most powerful ways of using your mind to get brain health.
Did I hear you say that there isn't a mental health disease? It's more of just a pattern or something that we should be mindful of, but it's not an actual disease?
No, it's not a disease. And I know this counters the current philosophy, but if you look at the science, there's a large body of science. In fact, if you interpret all the science around this field and you really look at what's being tested, you actually will see it's not a they've been looking for the neurobiological correlates. So they've been looking for where in the brain is depression. And for years we've been told about the serotonin imbalance causing depression. I mean, that's not even, it was a theory, never proven, great for marketing, for selling drugs, and also a simplistic way of telling someone, hey, you're depressed, don't worry, it's chemical imbalance, let me give you a drug to fix it. We want this quick fix mentality. So as medicine has advanced and technology has advanced, so we've become very caught up in the quick fix. But life's not like that. Mind is not like that. Mind is separate from brain and body. You can apply that kind of thinking, not quick fix, but you can apply a symptomatic diagnosis treatment approach to body, to physical brain and body. But when it comes to mind, that there's this gravitational field, this force, this think, feel, choose thing. It's not going to go, a medication's not going to change how you're thinking, feeling, and choosing. It's not going to get rid of this. It's just going to numb your brain. So maybe you don't feel this while it's working.
Wow.
But at the same time as then when that drug wears off, this is still there. This is still being recognized by the immune system of your brain as a problem. So this is increasing your the longer it's there, the more you increase your vulnerability to disease.
Oh my gosh.
And this is what gets you stuck. And these are the patterns. So no, it's not an illness. It is a normal human response. Pandemic, we all know that everyone's going on about the next pandemic is mental health. Mental health has always been an issue. Notice from the beginning of time, mankind has battled with life, with issues, with death,
right.
with fighting, with war, with whatever. So mental health's not on the rise. But the mismanagement of mental health, making it a disease, has created a whole new problem.
Wow.
So here we sit with, before the pandemic, they started doing a population study in the mid-90s, and this is when I was still early days of my practicing, sort of 10 years into my work. And I started seeing this trend and I was watching the study where people the decades-long trend of people living longer. So we all hear this message. This is what we've heard. People are living longer because of the advances in medicine and technology. None of us question that. But something happened in 96 that did start questioning that. By the mid-2000s, it was an established, researched fact that we don't live longer anymore, that the trend of people living longer has actually reversed, and that we have a pandemic of deaths of despair, where people are dying from preventable lifestyle diseases, and the age group most being affected are between 24 and 65. So people at the beginning of their career and the prime of their career and through that age group are dropping down dead like flies. And it's considered deaths of despair by preventable lifestyle diseases. So we have to look at lifestyle disease means that there's something in our body that's weaker. Why? Lifestyle, which is mind-driven. How am I eating, drinking, sleeping? But more than that is, what's my mind behind all of that? How am I actually managing the day-to-day moments? How am I managing the patterns, the traumas, the established toxic habits? What am I doing about that stuff? And that's when we ignore all of that, because this current trend of science is saying, those don't matter. What matters is the symptoms. Let's just look for the symptoms.
Right.
Checklist, diagnose, label. When you label someone, you chop up to 10 years more of their life. It's like it's adding on. They've shown studies of people with a mental health diagnosis have chopped their up to 20 years off their lifespan. People on psychotropic drugs, because of all the complications and the changes in the brain and the body, chopping up to 25 years of their life. I mean, this is serious. So here we have this already existing, then the pandemic hits. Now another year, they say that there's an additional year being chopped off people's lives. But there's such a contradiction because they're saying, hey, there's this adverse circumstance, grief of loss of people, uncertainty, medical, and not knowing if you're going to live or die, and how long is this isolation going to go on, and economic impact, and whatever, the whole lot. That's trauma, and they're saying that when they're saying, but this is the way to treat it. Let's label it, let's diagnose it, let's medicate it. So here we've come into COVID with a problem, with that stupid philosophy that's created such a lot of problems. And scientifically, this has all been researched and shown. And now we've got the pandemic, and now they want to carry on that system that didn't work to this, which is going to make it even worse. So we've got to shift our narrative completely, and we've got to stop saying that mental illness is on the rise and that there's 1 in 4 people on antidepressants or depressed. 100% of people are depressed and anxious and concerned about this COVID pandemic. 100% of people in the world at some point in their life have and will be anxious and depressed and in grief and sadness and terror and despair and one of the others. A large percentage of the population, and I'm not sure the exact percentage because no one's really done this kind of research, but estimates it's probably 30-40% of people will have extreme trauma from abuse, war trauma, that kind of stuff, where they'll go down the continuum to sort of the minus 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, if you look at a continuum of 0 to 10, 0 to minus 10. And have things like psychotic breaks and hearing voices and extreme states of distress, mental distress, which are still not diseases. They are simply in that traumatic situation, you're having a traumatic response. Think of someone who's a war vet. I just interviewed a Navy SEAL the other day who was trained snipers. And I mean, the things that he had to do and that his teams had to do, they come back and try and, we all know the problem of trying to, reconcile back into civilian life after you've gone through. Very challenging, yeah. I mean, this is what they're experiencing all day long, stuff that's completely against survival, completely against our human nature. And now instead of them being allowed to process this trauma, they're coming back and being told that they're diseased. And he would tell me that what they do with a lot of, we don't hear this sort of thing, but he told me this, they will inject things like risperidol, which is an antipsychotic, into the spines of war vets because they're a bit psychotic, and they're psychotic for a reason. It's their coping. How do you deal with this? Of course you're going to be angry, you're going to be frustrated, you're not going to be able to love like you did. You have to be able to embrace, process, and reconceptualize. Giving them a drug's not going to make it, not going to help it. In fact, it constrains the brain. It restricts the brain. There's no chemical cure for that. That's just going to add fuel to the fire because your mind's got to work through the brain. So now you put chemicals in, and now that's not going to facilitate change. We have to do something. So it's like a narrative.
Do you feel like is there such a thing as a chemical imbalance in some people? When they say, I have a depression, it's a disease, or bipolar, or I have this mental health disease, or I have a chemical imbalance, I was treated with this, don't try to say I don't because this is who I am. Do some people have that, or is that...
That's a result of...
Go ahead.
The narrative of I have a chemical imbalance and my depression is from chemical imbalance is a narrative that is the only explanation that people are being given. They're not given an alternative reaction. An alternative narrative. So the most important thing is that anyone listening to this podcast, I want to validate your depression, your anxiety, your grief, your despair, your PTSD, whatever label you've been given. I want to validate that doesn't need to be validated with a disease label. You're not diseased. You're not a broken brain. Your brain isn't defective. You are going through something. So you aren't something. You aren't that. You are going through something.
You're experiencing something.
You're experiencing something, and you've coped in the only way that you could cope in that moment. So it created this adverse response because it was an adverse situation, and you were just trying to cope. So what we have to do is go through a process of embracing and processing and reconceptualizing. So the important thing here is to recognize that chemical imbalance isn't the cause of your despair. The cause of your despair is what you've gone through and what you're going through, and not knowing how to manage it and how to deal with those thoughts that are driving you crazy, and those flashbacks and the trauma of the flashbacks and going back into those situations of the rape or the abuse or the war trauma or it will drive a person crazy. And that's not crazy in the sense of illness. It's crazy in the sense of your mind is like this erratic tidal wave around you, and it's going through your brain, and you've got these and your immune system and everything screaming out to you and saying, hey, let's fix this. So a disease label invalidates it. And for a moment, it might be nice to know, okay, well, there's a label to how I feel, because it kind of gives us feels like we've got a bit of control. So initially, that gives you comfort, but don't see yourself as that. It's better to say, I'm experiencing post-traumatic stress issues because of what I've been through, versus I am PTSD, or I have the sickness of PTSD.
Right.
It's better to say, I'm experiencing symptoms of bipolar, these intense swings because of my whole story, than saying I have bipolar, I have a chemical imbalance. I mean, just researchers coming out the other day showed that we've got to stop saying this. The top psychiatrists that lead this field will tell you we've got to stop saying this, that there's no ways that serotonin imbalance, you can't even measure that. There's no genes or serotonin imbalance causing it. It's what you've experienced that's the cause. And then that moves through your brain and your body. So obviously your brain and your body respond. So we will see changes in the brain and the body. We will see neurochemical chaos, not necessarily serotonin imbalance. That's just one. Sometimes it's dopamine, and if dopamine's down, serotonin's off, and then anandamide's off, and then, I mean, I can give you a list of big chemical terms, and that's going to change every function in the structure of your brain and your DNA and your telomeres, and 1,400 neurophysiological responses are off. So, that's the response, though. And that doesn't mean that you have this thing hidden inside of you, this scary thing that's controlling you. And that invalidates. If someone comes back from war, or someone's had a sexual trauma, to tell them that the depression or anxiety they're feeling is an illness is an insult to what they've gone through. But if I say to you, gosh, that's terrible, tell me about it. I want to hear your story. I want to support you. Your depression and anxiety that you're feeling is a signal that there's stuff going on. There's an origin story. There's a source. So can I listen? Can I help? Can I support you in trying to recognize the signals and go through the process to find the origin story and then to reconceptualize it? And that takes time. It's not a 15-minute appointment where I can give you a label. That takes time. That's not... And it's also not the conditioning kind of treatments that are in place, that some of them work if they're used in the right place, but to try and put a veteran who's gone through something back into the situation, to try and condition them. You can't condition, you have to reconstruct. So it's kind of like an algebraic equation. X is the situation. Y is how you want to function for mental peace. So you've got X plus Y. And so here we are in our X situation where we are the sort of human experiencing life. We're supposed to be at Y. And you put the two together, and what the current treatment says is that, okay, now we're going to create Z. We're just going to ignore X and Y. We're going to create a new thing, and that new thing is you diseased. But that doesn't work. It's actually X plus Y equals XY. X is what you're going through. Y is where you want to find mental peace. And you want to put the two together to live together so that you can change how the past plays out into your future.
Oh, man, this is powerful. Gosh. I want to go back to what you said when you were experiencing this traumatic event in the family you had recently, where you were wearing a glucose monitor, and you mentioned that there was a process. You realized like the monitor went through the roof, heart palpitations, stress. You could feel your physiological, your body changing into this stress response, this protection, tightness, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Fear, anxiety, all these things you were experiencing in the moment. What was the process that you broke down to bring it back to more normal levels for yourself of feeling more peace, groundedness, calm?
Okay, so it's the process of the neurocycle. Excellent question. It's the process of the neurocycle, which it's in the second half of the book. So the neurocycle is This is the 5 steps, right? Yeah, this is the 5 steps. This is what I initially developed for people with traumatic brain injury. It was my first time that I developed it and developed my theory. And then from there, I refined it to all the different types of situations I worked with, and then it's been refined over the years. This is the most updated research. So a good scientist should keep learning and changing and improving, which is what I've tried to do. So in this book is the updated version of the neurocycle. The neurocycle is how you get your mind, which is always working, under control. If in a state of acute trauma, like I was in that moment, acute trauma creates a red brain. I showed you that picture of a red brain. That red brain means that I have a tidal wave in my brain going on, or that there is the left and the right brain will be out of harmony. I'll have a drop of blood and oxygen to the front of my brain. I'm going to have things like the delta. We've heard of things like delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. All those waves are supposed to flow like waves in the sea. And if you think of the sea, you've got the big swells, which is delta, slightly smaller swells, which is theta, then they build, which is beta, the crest, which is high beta, and the gamma, which is the ripple on the beach. And so we want that through the brain in this nice kind of even way. That's kind of the Y state. X plus Y. X is what happens to us. Y is that state. So X happens and then that Y state gets thrown off. So in that moment, that's what happened to me. So what we want to do is, because mind works through brain and body, and mind is experiencing this trauma, which is a mess, our brain and body just do what the mind's doing. So then there's a mess in our brain and our body. But if I have that kind of chaos, I can't think straight. Right. I'm not going to have any wisdom. I'm going to fall apart. And in this situation, I would have. And I have in the past, but now I've learned how to deal with this. Sure. And I talk about there that this neurocycle can improve how you manage anxiety and depression by 81%. That's a massive claim, and I've shown it scientifically. Okay, so what I did was to try and get myself back under control. Now, in that state, you don't know what to do in a tremendously acute traumatic state. But I knew from my science and from my knowledge, and so I'm proactive, so I could go into two zones. So I went into two modes. The one mode was the mental mess that I was in, which is the pilot, because I'm driving. I'm in this time. Imagine yourself being in a helicopter that's like a time capsule. And you're flying over this forest, and the forest is your mind with all these trees. And this acute trauma has just grown because it's instant. So here's this terrible, and your helicopter's drawn to this because you are in shock and terror and fear and deep panic and anxiety. That is all the smoke signals. So my pilot's going like this. The co-pilot is also me, but it's my wisdom, because inside of each of us is our survival. And that's our instinct. That, when you give someone great advice and you just think, oh wow, where did that come from? Or you get that, it's that depth. Like we know what we know how much we can handle. We'll say, I know this, that kind of thing. That's the co-pilot, this wisdom. So what we want to do in those states is to get ourselves into the co-pilot. Remember the co-pilot and the pilot, and you use the you language. So here you flying this plane all over, and the co-pilot saying, okay, let's calm down, let's land it at that tree. So you land the plane, you land this time capsule, whatever, and you get out, but you're with the co-pilot, so you're safe. So you've created a distance, and this is, I'm explaining in detail, and obviously you train, and it's all in the book, and I've got an app that explains it too, but this is the mindset that I have trained myself to come into, so I can go into an acute trauma in that mind. I'm still crying, I'm still freaking out.
Right.
But I'm freaking out in this zone where I now know, because I know that I need wisdom. I need to be able to tap into that, and I cannot get through this chaos, if this chaotic brain and body and mind, unless I've calmed it down. So I have to get through this, because I'm stuck in that black tree and I'm stuck in this chaotic brain. So
would that be considered like fight or flight, whether it's someone cutting you off in front of you in the on the street in the car, or someone yelling at you, or someone, whatever, an event's happening which is causing you to react in fight or flight, whether it's a massive T trauma or little T trauma, right?
Exactly. Or an acute trauma, which is the blindsiding stuff, the stuff we don't expect that just hits us out the blue. Yes, absolutely. So you're going into a level of fight and flight. So everything physiologically, 1,400 neurophysiological responses are activated to help you focus. But they can't work for you unless you do what I'm telling you to do, which is to shift your perception. So this is the how-to, because as soon as you shift your perception in an instant, because I told you within seconds I brought the glucose monitor down. And I mean, I didn't even expect it to work that fast. I was amazed. And as it cycled through the 12 hours of the trauma, I was able to manage it more and more. Right. So I mean, it really, and this is not the first time I've done this my whole life, but it was just so interesting seeing it in real time.
Sure.
And seeing the reaction. Okay, so
step one is to get the co-pilot state of mind to land the plane.
That's the preparation. We haven't even got to step one. So there's preparation.
So land the plane first.
Yeah, so that's it. So recognize that you remember there's a co-pilot, which is your wise mind, you the crazy pilot going all over the place, land the plane. Let the co-pilot tell you, okay, land the plane. And you land the plane where you need to, which is at the issue. And what drew you into land the plane to find the issue was your emotional. So this is step one. You're going to gather awareness, and gather means you controlling it. You're not sitting under the apple tree and all the apples are hitting you on the head. You are standing back and you're picking the apple. So there's control, there's a sense of autonomy, a sense of agency. So in the midst of chaos, you can create agency mentally because your mind's driving it. So you stand back and you say, okay, I picked that apple. So that's my emotional warning signals: terror, despair, utter, totally traumatized, like whatever they are. You pick those apples, you put them in your basket. So you're gathering. Then you gather awareness.
So this is gathering kind of your
awareness.
This is how I'm feeling. This is what's happened. This is the event.
Yes, this is gathering. It's almost, yes, it is. But you're gathering in 4 little distinct packages, because the more organized you are, the less chaos. We're being very systematic.
So what are those four? What are those 4 things?
So you gather awareness of your emotional warning signals. So the despair, anxiety, whatever, panic attack. Then you gather awareness of your physical bodily response. So here's your co-pilot saying, okay, how are you feeling? Gather that apple. What is your physical? Fluttering in the heart, panic attack, tension, gut-wrenching, adrenaline, whatever flight and fright, freeze mode you're in. Then your behaviors. What are you saying? What are you doing?
How are you responding? How are you responding?
Yeah, action. Yeah, what you're saying, what are you doing? What is actually happening? And I'm grabbing this, I'm grabbing that, get this, get that. So what is that, and is it working? Just doing this changes how you do things. It's amazing. You immediately go into this different mode. 4th one is perspective. What's your perspective? This is doomed. This is terrible. This is sucks. This is end. Or, okay, this is bad, but. So you gather. Then as soon as you've got those, you then go into reflect. So it's very systematic. And then as you've gathered and done all this preparation thing, you've got the 2 sides of the brain. You've got coherence again. You've got blood flow back to the brain. You've got oxygen back to the front of the brain. When you've got low oxygen and low blood flow at the front of the brain, which happens in a trauma, in an acute situation, in those sudden things, it drops. Then you are impulsive. You're going to make bad decisions. You're going to react incorrectly. You're going to create incoherence. Your alpha wave in the brain drops and becomes more active on the right side. And that's on the right side, which is not great, because that means that we now are not going to have insight. So by doing what I've just said, you change all of that. You bring back coherence, you increase alpha, and it may not be excellent yet, but you've started the process. Then as you move forward through the 5 steps, and I put all this brain stuff in the book and what happens, and so I'm just giving you the overview. So then you start now reflecting, okay, what have I got in my basket? So number 2, reflect. Reflect is an incredibly beautiful word, as is gather awareness. Gathering awareness, I just want to point out, earlier on I said that we mustn't be frightened of despair and anxiety and trauma and the anxiety, depression, those scary. Don't be scared of them, because they are messengers. They're helpful messengers that are telling you something. And if you respond to them in that way, you then control them. But if you respond to them in fear, they control you.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, and then you're not going to move forward. You're going to get very stuck, and then stuck in rumination, and the patterns will just get worse. So get the control. Even though you can be crying, screaming, swearing, I don't care what you're doing, but just get the control. You're at the tree, you're doing the stuff. So gather. Reflect is, when you think of light going through a prism, it reflects all the colors of the rainbow. So there's depth. There's that one thing means a lot. And so reflect is this process of being a detective. Okay, well, why am I having that reaction? Now, when it's something in the moment, we pretty much know why. I knew why I was, so I didn't have to do too much reflection, but I had to, the reflection in terms of why, because I knew the cause. But the difference was I needed to reflect to say, okay, if I react like this is going to happen. Right. So it was questioning, what are you doing with that emotion? What are you doing with that behavior? Is that behavior helping? So the reflect in that situation would be different to a reflect for someone who is having a complete and utter imposter syndrome attack. And it's a pattern, and they keep doing it. So they're now working sequentially through the process. So they're going to have to start finding why. What does it track back to? What level? What sort of self-esteem issues are? What is the origin story of it? So that the reflect in that case would be, ask, answer, discuss. Why do I feel this? Why? And so it's a different. So but reflect is to just get meaning, but in a very comprehensive way, because there's all these patterns of meaning. In that acute trauma, it's quick. I'm doing the 5 steps quick. If I'm working on a pattern over time, I'm going to spend longer. 3rd step is you write. And the writing step is, obviously I was in the midst of a trauma, I couldn't write, so I would visualize. So the quick stuff you can just visualize, or if you can write. Writing, I recommend, if you write in the form of a metacog. I teach you how in the book, and I have a video of a neurocycle app that goes with this.
What's a metacog?
A metacog is a pattern form of writing that stimulates, it looks like a tree. You start in the middle and you work on branches and you put words and you don't write whole sentences. You basically just pour information and you literally let it just come out in this pattern format. But one of the key things is to group as something comes up, you put it on one area, and as something else comes up, you put it wherever. So you have these clusters of information, and every word's on a line, and every line goes out of the previous line. And that format is unbelievable. It just drags the two sides of the brain together, digs deep, and you start getting insight into what you didn't even know was there. And then the fourth step is to then go and sort out that chaos that you've just written down. So the fourth step is to, okay, I've gathered awareness, I've reflected, I'm writing. What does this mean? What's the mental autopsy? What's the pattern, the activators, the antidotes? How can I reconceptualize this? Beautiful word, reconceptualize. And then you end off the cycle with a little action. And that action, if it's in the moment, like in that 5 seconds or whatever, it's okay, I'm going to actually take a deep breath and I'm going to act like this, or I'm going to say that, or I'm going to do this. So it's a little action that anchors you back in a state where you can function in the next moment, in that acute trauma or in that imposter moment and imposter syndrome moment, and you've now got to go and into a business meeting and you're feeling like you can't because you're in, the imposter syndrome fraud sort of setup. So in doing it in the quick moment by moment, you're going to have a simple, quick action. In the big stuff where you're working out the pattern, each day you do your work for a limited amount of time. And I say do the work because it's not a quick fix. If you're looking for a quick fix, nothing related to greatness is a quick fix or mind.
Right.
It's time, and you know that you experience that with your whole story. And so essentially you would do it for around 15 to 45 minutes a day when you're fixing up the big stuff. And you would do it, Lewis, the big stuff you would do for 63 days. So that's key.
Why 63?
Glad you asked that. So we've all been told 21 days to build a habit. Well, that's a complete myth. I wrote about it in the book too. It's not a neurosurgeon, a surgeon many years ago was talking about the physical cycles of healing that our body goes through. Like if you get a blister, it takes about 3 weeks for the stem cells and everything to form and the immune system to do its job to get rid of the blister. That's assuming that your mind's not a mess. If your mind's a mess, you can chop off 60% of that healing time. It'll take 60% longer.
Wow.
Up to 60% longer if your mind's a mess. You increase healing.
If your mind is right, it decrease
It does it
the
on time. It does it on time.
Oh,
But sometimes
on time.
and sooner. It depends. It depends on the level of damage. Sometimes you'll need one cycle of 3. Sometimes you'll need multiple. That's for physical healing. Mind healing, however, needs a minimum of 3 cycles for behavior change.
Really? How do we? Is this scientifically proven, or is this?
So there's very little research in the 21-day myth. So I decided to research it, and there's a few studies. There's one from University College London. I put them in my book. There's my one that I've just done recently in 2019 over 2020, where we tracked in the brain what happens. So 21 days, you get what we call gamma peaks, which means that you've taken this, you've deconstructed it, and you've reconstructed it into something healthy. So you've changed the thought, but it's XY. So that's in there, but it's in a different. It looks different. It's like if you take an ugly old house that you're going to renovate, you take lots of photos of all the mold and all the ugly carpets and you bash it down, you build a beautiful new house. You still remember how it was, but you've reconceptualized it. You're living in that new space. You remember the old. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. That takes 21 days. So you break down and build a thought with memories, because a thought is a tree made of memories. Memories are like a tree's made of branches, thoughts are made of memories. So to make something that's got a level of sustainability takes about 21 days. And in that 21 days, after that, if you stop there, it's a tiny little plant in your forest. It doesn't have enough energy to move from the non-conscious mind, NON. The non-conscious mind operates 24/7. It's where all your experiences are stored in thoughts, all your belief systems, your nurturing, everything about you. And that is influencing your conscious mind. Conscious mind's only awake when you're awake. So right now as I'm talking, everything that I'm saying is stimulating thoughts from your non-conscious mind to move into your conscious mind to make sense of what I'm saying and to build all this new stuff into thoughts in your trees. So a non-conscious mind, for a thought to move from the non-conscious to the conscious through the subconscious. So non-conscious, subconscious is the bridge, conscious is when you're awake. Non-conscious, 24/7, infinite, huge, massive, and where our wisdom is as well. So the wisdom is through the middle. If you want to imagine a forest, you've got the beautiful dark green strip, which is all your instinctive wisdom, survival stuff, wired for love stuff, optimism, bias, and then everything we experience in life is around the edge. Little trees, big trees, dark trees, green trees. The smaller the tree, the newer the experience, or the newer the memory, the weaker the memory. The big established trees are the ones that influence. So those things are powerful. So if it's a big big dark tree and it's going to jump into your conscious mind and influence your view. So backtracking to get something that's good that you've rebuilt to actually influence how you view something, it has to have more energy put into it. Energy is never lost, energy is transferred. Quantum physics talks about energy. These things are proteins with energy vibrating in the little protein structures. So you want that they're weak, so you've got to strengthen.
So you got to water it. You got to feed it some fertilizer.
Totally. And all you do is, it's so easy. Oh my gosh, it's so easy. From day 22 to 40 to 63, you simply do step number 5 for about a minute a day. That's how simple it is. It's 42 minutes over 42 days. In my Neurocycle app, I've actually got an active reminder function that you can type it in, so it pops up on your phone, and you can remind yourself to do this. And you literally just read it, and it keeps just reading it reminds you to do it, and then you're building your strength and you're turning it into behavior change. So to go around, the theme of your podcast, to get to greatness requires behavior change. So real behavior change, if you really want to build a good habit into your life, you're going to have to spend the 63 days doing it. So not only is that 63 days, I've shown it scientifically and so on, not only is it for detoxing the patterns, the traumas, the toxic habits, the small t, big T, as you mentioned, the acute stuff, the bad habits we've developed, but it's also to build new habits. So if you identify this is an area that I want to grow in my life to go to the next level of greatness, whatever that is, you need 63 days at least, and sometimes more. Sometimes the trauma is so embedded and it's blocking your greatness that you might need multiple cycles of 63. There's no cookie cutter design. But the more you do that and the more you practice it in the moment by moment, the more self-regulated you become, which brings us right back to the beginning of the conversation, which was that mind is always in action.
What is the difference between the mind and the brain? And does the brain control the mind, or does the mind control the brain?
You've asked one of my favorite questions there. That's a really great place to start. I've got some props. Is that okay? Can I use some props to show you?
Show me. Explain. So I need to understand in a simplified way.
Okay, so here's a brain, not a real one, in a skull. And the terminology for about the last 40 years is that the mind and the brain have been used interchangeably. So most people think when you talk mind, you're talking brain, or when you're talking brain, you're talking mind. And most of the popular literature, even the scientific literature that the media tends to put out, talks about how the brain produces thoughts, or the brain produces the mind. But your brain actually can't do anything on its own. So if you did, and if I was holding up this, if this was a real brain and I just took it out of someone's head, which I wouldn't do, but if it was bleeding and whatever, and you looked at this brain, we could stare at this all day long, but it would never do anything. So what is the difference between a dead brain and yours and mine and the listeners and the viewers is that you are actually thinking, feeling, and choosing. You're alive, and your aliveness is your mind. And your mind is this ability that of what you're doing right at this moment as you're listening to me. You are processing the auditory sound waves, the electromagnetic light waves, through your ability to think and feel and choose, which is mind. So your mind is this like processing, unique, brilliant processing field, gravitational field around and through your brain and body. And you convert what you're hearing and seeing into actual meaning. And that meaning is formed from trees that you actually grow into your brain. So at 400 billion actions per second, you're using your mind to translate auditory and visual signals into protein tree-like structures in your brain to make sense of what I'm saying. And then each new thing that I say, you're growing more and more. And everything I'm saying is in the root section because it's the source of the information. And the tree trunk and the branches are your interpretation of what I'm saying. And you're linking it to other existing, whatever I'm triggering at the moment that you know about whatever in your life related to a subject. And that keeps going. And that's what we do all the time. That's your mind is always with you. And your mind works through the brain, and the brain then responds. So here's a little model. So your mind is the gravitational field, and this is not woo-woo science. This is hardcore Nobel Prize-winning science, that this discovery of the gravitational field. In fact, Einstein spoke about it back in the early 20th century, how each human has this gravitational field, this electromagnetic field around us, and that is basically through us. And when you die, that's not there anymore, and that's the thing that's kind of keeping you alive. And that's the thinking, feeling, choosing the psychological version, and the sciencey version is this gravitational field. So it's a little bit like a magnet. This is a super easy way to understand it. If you imagine a piece of white paper and you put a whole lot of iron filings on the paper, you may have done this at school, and then you bring a magnet and you put that in the middle of this mountain of iron filings, and suddenly you've got this beautiful electromagnetic field. The iron filing arranges itself into this field around the magnet. So you can't see the electromagnetic field, but you can only see it because of the iron filings. It's invisible, but the iron filings follow the tracing of the field, and therefore you can see it. So the relationship between the magnet and the field allows the iron filings to express themselves in that pattern. The brain is like the magnet, and the field is your mind, and the relationship allows you to express your behaviors. So the little pattern is your behaviors. And the biggest core thing is that that's the primary source. You never stop thinking. Your mind is always going. You wake up with your mind, you eat with your mind, you choose your clothes with your mind, you're doing the podcast with your mind, you go to sleep with your mind. So mind is the source. And if you don't understand and manage it, it's changing anyway, then it's a mess. And if it's a mess, your brain and body are a mess, and you can't achieve greatness. So to achieve greatness, you need to understand mind. There you go. There was a mouthful.
Let's just end the podcast now. That was perfect. So how wide can this? So the mind, your thinking, your ideas, your thoughts, is a field, an energetic field.
Yeah.
Around you, inside of you, connected through your whole body, and then outside of your body. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Exactly. Totally.
How far does the field extend? Is it 2 feet in front of us? Is it 6 feet? Is it a football field? How far can it go?
We don't really know, because when you're talking about quantum physics and gravitational fields, there's a lot of interaction that occurs. But what the science seems to show is that it's kind of almost how, like around us, sort of this
like a halo-y field.
Like and it's probably more but it interacts because everyone's got this field, and we live in gravitational fields. So everything around you is a gravitational field. So everything's interacting. And so that's why, when you come up to someone, an example would be like that electrostatic shock. When when you brush past someone and you get that. And on a more psychological level, you can experience that field is like maybe you're in a really great mood, and then you get into a conversation with some friends and they're so totally depressed, and you come away from there thinking, I feel awful, I need to go and have a shower. You feel so... So their field has interacted with yours and impacted you, because that field is coming from your mind, which then uses the brain and converts what you're experiencing into these thoughts. And then these thoughts are generating, there's this whole relationship, the iron filings concept. And there's this back and forth, and this literally is photons. Einstein showed this, that we're literally generating from our thoughts as we talk from our thoughts, you can't talk without thoughts. You build thoughts, and then your actions and behaviors and communication come from the thoughts. So this would generate healthy. It's a nice healthy green tree, and here's a toxic one. So this would be a toxic, the depression or whatever, being negative or whatever. That would generate toxic photons. And these are the ones that would make you, you feel it. You feel that negativity. This is a sense of you're around a happy person and you just feel like amazing, And so it's very real. This is not some ethereal thing. We're talking about the non-physical sciences of quantum physics and things like that. But it's real. And there's an impact and an effect, and we can control it. That's the interesting thing.
What is the definition of quantum physics? What is that in relation to the mind?
So quantum physics is considered to be one of the most fundamental and accurate sciences, and at its most simple level, because it's really had bad press, but it's been around for very long, and it basically just deals with the unseen, when you talk about particles and waves and the subatomic level. So what we can see now looking at each other would be what we would consider the classical physics realm, that you can see and touch and feel and hear. So it's very...
you can operate on it. You can...
Yes. Yeah, so it's the physical. But if you actually, and we see from studying of the atom that things get smaller and smaller, and then you've got the subatomic level, then you're entering the quantum world. So once we go into the subatomic level, we actually see that the atom is not really an atom. Particles change according to their waves, and then their particles only when you actually look at them. So it's considered the observer effect, and it's really interesting because it means that we have these waves of energy, and as we make a choice, we create reality, which we do. So as you think, feel, and choose, you change your brain, because every time you choose, think, feel, and choose, those three things always go together. Always thinking means you're always feeling. thinking and feeling means you're always choosing, and it's happening at like 400 billion actions per second constantly. So we're processing this world around us through this think, feel, choose, and then we build thoughts. So there's this structural consequence. So thought is actually a physical response of the think, feel, choose. And quantum physics kind of is helping us understand that. But quantum physics is real, is easier to understand with classical physics. So classical physical, quantum, the sort of non-physical world to work together. Does that make sense?
It does. When we feel something, when something happens, there's an event in our life. Someone touches us. Do we feel it first? Do we think that we're feeling something? And how is that connection to the mind, body work?
Very good question. So it's think, feel, choose. So like as we
are... So I touch you on the shoulder. You think it first or you feel it first?
It's going to happen pretty much simultaneously. So there's going to be because there's the sensation, and it immediately will stimulate think and then feel and then choose. So the feeling, the think, feel, choose work together to make sense of the physical impact and what it means and if it's threatening or not threatening, and all kinds of decisions are made in your mind, and it happens super fast. So it's think, feel, choose in cycles, and it's really, really fast. You know, we talk about 400 billion actions per second, but it's actually a 10 to the 27 and faster, which is an inconceivable speed. So what I've done with my work is to try and understand this, you know, what is a thought and what is memory and what is mind and what is brain and how do they interact and how do they influence and do we have any sense of agency over this process and what does that look like?
Yeah, can you explain it all?
Absolutely, I can certainly try. So I spent 38 years studying this, and I started out in the world of working in more clinical. I practiced clinically for 25 years, and I initially started my research in the 80s, and funny enough, in the 80s, we were taught that the brain couldn't change. So all my lectures were around the brain is fixed.
It's fixed. Fixed mind, fixed brain, fixed mindset.
Yeah, so that's it. You've just got to learn how to kind of, you know, work around it. And so that's just, and compensate, more of a compensation kind of philosophy. So I remember thinking in one of my neuroscience lectures that this does not work for me because we're changing and growing as humans. So I said, no, I'm going to start researching this. And I was told by my professors, that's a ridiculous question. And I actually did a TED talk on this, the ridiculous question of neuroplasticity. So in the 80s, I said, okay, well, give me the worst situation. What's the worst situation? They said, okay, it's traumatic brain injury. Once someone's had a traumatic brain injury, and I mean, your dad went through one, that's it. Pretty much that's, you know, written off. And we were trained, as I said, to compensate. So I said, okay, well, there's hardly any research in the 80s on brain injury and on how to treat it. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start there. And so I worked with people that had been in comas for like longer than 2 weeks. And at that stage, if you were in a coma for longer than 8 hours, the brain damage was considered irreversible. Now, in this day and age, we know that's not the case. But in the 80s, that was the going philosophy. So I was completely swimming upstream when it came to this concept. Anyway, I showed with my subjects that with using your mind, and not in any weird way, just a very systematic, deliberate, intentional mind management in different ways and different brain building and dealing with emotions and just different ways, same sort of process, that you can actually change this. And so some of my very first case study was a girl who was 16 at the time of her accident, and she had lost a whole year of school, written off as a vegetable. I mean, that's what the doctors used to say in those days, which is a terrible thing to say to someone. Anyway, long story short, after 8 months, not only did she manage to, she came around. I started working with her when she was conscious and functioning sort of at a second grade level, and she wanted to. Her goal of greatness was to get back to finish 12th grade, and with her peer group. Now that was an impossible task. All the doctors said, don't even go down that road. Not even worth it. So I said, well, I was a new scientist then, very young, totally into this. Said, well, you go with me, let's do this. And within 8 months, she caught up to a 12th grade level, finished school with her peers, and went on to get a university degree. And one of the coolest things was that she was actually a really average student and not even good at math. After the accident, using her mind to change her brain, she became like a math genius. You know, I mean, this was like, and I can tell you story after story, and that really motivated me to work across the board with, now I really have to understand what's going on. And I happened to be living in South Africa where I grew up at the time. I was born in Zimbabwe and grew up in South Africa. And in the apartheid apartheid era. I mean, this is like, it really ages me, doesn't it? Go back into those. I worked through the apartheid era, the transition and the post-apartheid era. So I was seeing all the socioeconomic trauma, the racism trauma, and I worked in that 3 days a week in those environments with terrible poverty and whatever. And I worked in war-torn Rwanda, and I worked with the wealthiest of the wealthy, heads of CEOs of corporations, schools, everywhere that my laboratory was the world, to try and understand humans and mind and get away from this scientific concept that consciousness is the hard question and no one is really doing anything. We're just talking about it as being as this elusive philosophical thing that we will push aside, and one day promissory science will do it one day. And I thought, no, I can't do this, because I am mind, you are mind. So if I don't manage it, I mean, you can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you don't even go 3 seconds without using your mind. So my underlying premise was, okay, well, if that's the case, what is it? And how do we manage it? And if I don't manage it, what I did from my research, you can learn to manage it. Mind is malleable. You can direct the neuroplasticity of your brain. I did some of the first neuroplasticity research in my field in the late 80s, early 90s. Before it was accepted by the mid-90s, neuroplasticity was, well, that's it. And I showed that my underlying argument or thesis was, well, if our mind is always changing, which it is, so you wake up, you're experiencing everything, conversations, the emails, life, politics, you're immediately immersed in life, and you're processing that through your mind, you're growing it into your brain, and you're doing this every moment of the day. So if I don't control it, it's a mess. But if I do control it, then it isn't a mess. Now, I know we can't control events and circumstances. We all agree with that. So I'm not into this whole law of it. I'm not talking about law of attraction and, saying 15 positive affirmations and that's going to fix your story. No, I'm not talking about that at all. It's not realistic. I'm talking about the fact that you cannot control events and circumstances, but you can learn to manage your mind, which means your responses. So you can, yes, the things are going to happen, COVID, trauma, death, life happens, but how you manage it, and your case is a classic example. Your life was thrown upside down and your family's life was thrown upside down, and you managed your mind and got yourself back going. So you were doing this concept anyway. Greatness, that's why I said greatness comes from us managing our mind. And greatness doesn't necessarily mean that you've got millions in the bank and you're this famous superstar. It means that, do you have mental peace? Are you actually growing? Are you satisfied as a person? Are you, that's the sort of where we want to go, as opposed to this very externalized version of it. So
yeah, wow, this is it's really powerful. So how do we learn to manage our mind in response in a more positive way to the chaos, stress, traumas, dramas of life around us? Obviously we can maybe influence certain events to manifest in our life, but we can't control the things that are happening around us necessarily, just how we respond, like you said. So how do we learn to reframe our mind or rewire our mind, and so that we can have inner peace when there is trauma or pain around us?
Brilliant question. It's a skill that we learn. So that's really nice to know. The sooner, it's never too late to start, but the sooner we start, the better. So I have 4 adult children. They learned this, they grew up with this stuff. And as I've learned new things, they've been my lab rats. So they've been trained in, literally, and my husband. And they all work for me, by the way.
They're either all amazing kids or messed up kids.
Totally, yeah. We'll have to ask that question. Well, Dominique's my producer, so I think she's sort of doing okay there. But the biggest thing with the mind and managing mind, Lewis, is to accept that depression, anxiety, even the scary words like bipolar and schizophrenia, and then going to the more sort of things like that we can accept, grief, anger, etc. These are not illnesses. This is the biggest message that I probably have. The second biggest. The first is that mind is the source, and if you don't get mind right, everything else, you can read all the great books you want and go to all the great seminars and self-help, but unless your mind is right, you won't ever use that stuff. It's just data. And so there's another step missing, and it's understanding that autonomy, that sense of agency that we have to manage what's going on around us, and to accept part of mind management is not to make the bad stuff go away, but to know how to live in the bad stuff, because it's not going away. So despair, anger, depression, anxiety, these are all completely normal responses. In fact, they're very helpful. They're helpful messengers and warning signals, as opposed to being scary illnesses. They are not neuropsychiatric brain diseases like we've been told. They are actually responses. And because they are responses of our mind in the world, we use our brain and body to express them, because we've got the mind has to have the brain and body to build the thoughts, and then we use that to speak. We're using our physical to store what we've processed and to convert and then to speak. So obviously, if our mind's a mess, our brain and our body will be a mess. But because our brain's neuroplastic, and if we manage our mind, we can change our brain. We can change our DNA. Literally, that's what I've shown in my research. You can literally change your DNA, your blood markers, literally.
If you change your mind?
If you change your mind, you can immediately influence your biomarkers. So, for example, if you are in acute trauma, for example, and you go through, let me explain it in a very simple way. I've been testing out a continuous glucose monitoring device, and for some research purposes. And I happened to, while I was wearing it, because you wear it and then you track your levels. And I wanted to see, in terms of mental health and the neurocycle that I've developed, I wanted to see the impact. And I happened to be going through, we experienced a very acute trauma in our family over December. And in the moment of the trauma, I happened to see on my glucose monitor that my glucose had shot up to 240. Now, that's heart attack level. And I immediately managed my mind through the neurocycle, which is the concept that I've developed, which is just a system, anyone can learn it. And I dropped my glucose levels within seconds back down to a normal level. And as it cycled up, I could manage it. And if glucose is at that level, your cortisol's shot up at that level, your DHEA is dropped, your homocysteines up. All that means is that your immune system is going crazy.
Yeah.
Exactly. You've got a cytokine storm, like we talk with COVID. And in fact, your brain's immune system and your body's immune system will recognize that traumatic event, or that established trauma, or that mismanagement of whatever, that it will recognize that as an invader, like a virus, like COVID. So you get the same response to a mind thing, a thought, which is the consequence of mind. Think, feel, choose, you build thoughts. Thoughts are made of roots and trees, branches, which are the memories. So thoughts are made of memories, like trees are made of branches. This is toxic. It will stimulate the same response in the immune system as if I had COVID, or if I had a flu virus, or if I had measles or something, or any kind of damage in my body. The immune system sees that as threatening survival, because we are wired for survival. So this is not survival. So your immune system says, hey, that's a threat. Let's send out the army, T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, macrophages. Let's go fix this thing. And it creates inflammation, which is a temporary state of healing. So initially, inflammation is to isolate
to
and
protect.
fix.
Yeah.
Exactly. Isolate and protect. And then you're supposed to, fix this up and sort this out and find the root cause. And then this goes away. And then the anti-inflammatory factors come in and the inflammation goes away. But if we don't deal with the stuff, and we don't deal with our past traumas, and we don't deal with those patterns in our life that we are enacting, that the constant arguments, or these certain, we all have these toxic patterns. No one's immune. We all, and the signals of those are things like depression and anxiety, and those are simply telling you, hey, there's a pattern. It's either a trauma-based pattern, or it's a toxic habit you've developed, but that pattern is actually putting your body under tremendous stress, even to the point where your DNA is affected. And I showed in my research that, if you think of the DNA ladder, if you pull out a chromosome, it looks like an X, and where you see my fingernails, pink fingernails, for those of you that are listening, the pink fingernails would then represent what we call telomeres. And telomeres are a proxy for how you are managing your mind. Very interesting.
Aren't they also based on how long you'll live as well? If the telomeres are longer?
Exactly. Yeah. Totally correct. So
those are under attack and dying. You're probably physically going to die as well.
Exactly. That's exactly what I showed. So we had subjects at the beginning of in my clinical trial that I put in this book. We had subjects, and I've actually got a picture of this person's, one of the subjects' brains. This is looking inside their brain, and the blue represents someone who's totally depressed, flatline, brain flatline, literally. And this person's, all their biomarkers were up there, cortisol, inflammation, etc. But this shows that the energy levels in the brain are very flat. Blue means a very, very depressed, and this person was. Their narrative was tremendous trauma in their life. They were offline. They were battling with work, relationships, lot of stuff.
Everything was off.
Everything was off. Sleep, you name it. They were at ready to check out.
What page is this on?
This is on page. I should tell you. I should know the page off my heart. 161.
Okay, cool.
I think you probably got it in black and white in that version that you've got there. So this person's telomeres, when we looked at their DNA and we looked at their telomeres, they will tell you that the shorter they are, the weaker your cells, the shorter your lifespan, the more vulnerable you are to disease. Mm-hmm. So they were so that will show in terms of your biological age. So their telomeres were short and unhealthy. Their ages were in of this particular subject, and we had a group like this as well, that similar. Their chronological, the actual age was in their mid-30s, but their biological
like
age,
70 or something.
Yes, a sickly 70-year-old.
That's crazy.
Within 9 weeks of mind management. No, I don't use drugs. I do talk about diet and stuff, but in this particular clinical trial, it was pure mind management, just the neurocycle. Just get your mind under control. And that gray means that their brain stabilized, that the brain waves that they were actually managing. So here they were saying, I am depression, I am hopeless, all the biomarkers, DNA. Here they're saying, I now know why I feel depression. I'm not depression. I now know why. And depression is simply a signal of an underlying cause. It's not who I am. It's not it's not an illness. By 63 days, and these numbers are very significant, they were actually seeing behavior change in their life. They were saying, okay, so I know I'll still get depressed, but I know why and I know what to do. And there was changes in their behavior. They were back at work. They were back sleeping, 25% improvement in sleep. And I mean, all kinds of, like, their relationships were not suicidal anymore. And I mean, I can go on and on and on.
Wow.
This subject over here was in the control group, so they got no mind management. And what you'll see is a lot of red and a lot of chaos. And that red shows complete brain that is like a tsunami in your brain, which the biomarkers were terrible. This person's DNA telomeres were very short. And so with mind management, in 9 weeks, we showed how you can literally change your telomeres, which are your markers for aging and for health, mental health and physical health. And that's pretty unusual because most of the work on telomeres has been done around diet and exercise, which are very
significant. It's all about leafy greens and plant-based.
Exactly, which is significant. And also there's been some work on meditation, but there's been no, I think this is the first study that's been done on actually doing deliberate intentional mind work to change. And then we saw significant drops as well in inflammation markers and blood markers, but the biggest thing was their narrative, the person's story. So if we go away from the biology for a minute and we listen to the person's story, that person was offline, they were online, they were living again. And even though, and they had also had this acceptance, and this is what I wanted to kind of circle back to when we started, was life and managing your mind doesn't mean that it's going to be one big rosy, put on rose-tinted glasses. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. It is actually the ability to be okay and at peace with having moments of depression and actually looking for the message and seeing them as helpful. We have this really weird philosophy, which has been about 40 years in the West now, where we look at depression and anxiety and those kind of things as illnesses and neuropsychiatric brain diseases and as bad symptoms that we must suppress, like cancer symptoms you must suppress. So it's been lumped, our misery of life has been medicalized, to quote a brilliant psychiatrist, Joanna Moncrief. So we've got to really watch out for that. But actually, the real truth is that those depression and anxiety are not illnesses. They are just survival instincts. It's telling you, hey, pay attention. There's something going on. You need to go and unpack.
Something's not working. Something's not working. And it's manifesting as a pattern that needs to be addressed. And that'll block the greatness.
Food is such an important thing. So basically we know that. But it does have a massive impact. But what for me is so interesting about the food side is the fact that our mind controls the digestive system. So our mind is our aliveness. So the difference between you and I and a dead person is our mind. So for our gut to function and to be able to digest all the parts of our gut, to be able to digest food, our mind's actually running the show. And most people don't actually think about it like that. But if you're eating a really healthy, organic, sustainable, farm to table, local, all the right, the real food,
right.
the
Non-GMO, dairy,
non-GMO, the whole but you're in a mood, or you're not dealing with something traumatic, you're not dealing with an issue that's like a relationship issue, or you're just in a bad state of mind as you're eating. You could lose up to 86% of that nutrition just by the state of your mind, because your mind is driving your mind is basically that whatever you're thinking about is activated in your mind, in your brain, and in your body. And then your enteric nervous system, the whole thing is activated. And your enteric nervous system, which is the connection between the mind and the brain, this feedback loop, is driving the whole process. So, or being driven by your mind. So it responds very, very quickly. There's a very quick direct link between mind, brain, gut very, very fast. It's throughout the whole body, but it's extremely fast to the gut. And the gut has as many neurons in as the spinal cord. So we have about 300,000 neurons in our gut, which is about the amount we have in our spinal cord. So you probably, you would have heard of it, the gut-brain connection. And in the last 10 years, it's become a huge field of research in the microbiome and all that stuff, and how that's a lot to do with our intelligence, and how serotonin 95% is in the gut and 90% of dopamine. And so all these things, there's such a relationship. But what we don't always think about is that thought that you're thinking in your mind is actually activating and growing that whatever you're thinking about and whatever you're adding on, changes are happening in the brain. That's going to your gut. And everything involved in the process of digestion, including the pancreas and the gallbladder and the different parts of the intestine, the stomach, everything is being driven by these energy waves from the mind. So if our thought is toxic, you can, for example, let's just take one of the organs, the pancreas. The pancreas secretes 20 different neuropeptides that are required for the assimilation of food. And if you are in this mood or worried or anxious or not dealing with something or having a fight with someone, those 20 neuropeptides won't be secreted properly, or maybe only a few of them. And that's going to impact everything else. And then you just don't digest. The bloating people get, the gut issues, the sore stomachs, all leaky gut, constantly not dealing with our stuff wears down the lining of the gut. I mean, it just creates inflammation. The gut bacteria get affected. Your good bacteria go into hiding, and it's like a million different things. So that is so important. So I like to talk, Lewis, about the mindset behind the meal, as opposed to just the meal. And we focus so much on the food and diet that I think we've forgotten the most important component, which is mind. So I think we should manage that first, and then use that to manage
the dietary
aspects.
So can you eat bad foods and still have a good mindset around it and process those foods in a healthy way, so you actually take the nutrients out of it, or it doesn't affect your gut, or your building fat cells or whatever with this greasy fried sugary processed foods? Could you still have a healthy body with the right mindset, or do you also need the right nutrients and the right mindset to
you need both. You need both. Eventually that junk food is going to accumulate in your body. And we know that we are eventually going to create an environment, because our brain and body are the environment for the mind to operate in. So if the environment of the brain and the mind are affected physically by junk food, and as you said, the processed foods and things, it is going to wear the body down. Those excess chemicals, they cause leaky gut. They do all the things to the cardiovascular system. I mean, we know there's just so much research around that. So it's both. It's both.
But what I'm hearing you say is you could have all the healthiest foods and be thinking toxic thoughts, or abandoning yourself over and over, or staying in the wrong relationship, or not speaking up for yourself, or not forgiving something from your past and holding on to that. And it won't do much for you to have those healthy foods, or it might create inflammation still, or have leaky gut because of the mindset. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. Wow. And that's an aspect that people don't recognize, and it's not spoken about. It's not studied enough. It's, we always talk about 4 pillars or 3 pillars. People talk about diet, exercise, managing stress, as though they're 3 separate components. Meanwhile, the driving force is your mind, because if you're dead, none of those other things matter anyway. So your mind is your aliveness, and it drives all the others. So we've got to focus on the mindset, because you maybe, how many times do we hear of people that they are in their early 50s and they've been exercising and they've been eating well, and they're always smiling and they seem to be fine, and they drop down dead, or they commit suicide.
They have a heart attack or something. Yeah, they
have a heart attack, or something like that, and think, how? I mean, they're so healthy. So your mind overrides that benefit. So you've got to think of mind creates the changes in the brain, and the changes in the body that are either strengthening the environment of brain and body, or weakening. And if you cumulatively don't manage the toxic issues in your life, your body is slowly but surely changing, the brain-body environment slowly but surely changing in the wrong direction. So we move between this percentage of 35 to 98% increased in vulnerability to disease, the more we have an unmanaged mind.
So I have 2 questions. The first one I ask is about, what are the most important practices for first detoxing the brain? And then I want to talk about the mind afterwards. But what are the actual practices for detoxing the brain?
So the mind is going to do the detoxing. So the primary thing is that the mind detoxes. So the brain isn't generating, like genes aren't. It's there's a fancy terminology for it, but basically it means that the genes can't switch themselves on. The brain can't change itself, and we often hear in the media things like the brain can change itself. But if you did give me a dead brain and show me it changing, it doesn't change. But if I put QEEGs and fMRIs on you and I right now in this conversation, we'll see massive changes happening inside of our brain. So the first aspect is brain health is very reliant on mind health. And that is very primary. And so mind health is very much around keeping a messy mind managed. So I'm not sure if we spoke about this in the last interview because we spoke about so much stuff, but how I explain it is that we've got a messy mind and a wise mind. And that's like coming from, and we can define each of those, but basically your messy mind it's experimental. Every moment is an experimental moment in the life of a human when you're awake, because you don't know what's happening next. We can't control people, events, or circumstances. So everything is chance that's coming up in the next few moments. We can predict to a certain level of accuracy of what's coming up. And the more familiar you are with an environment and people, the more accurate your prediction. But it's still a prediction. It's not an accurate fact. So based on that, we are very experimental. And that is okay. We have a neurobiology, mind, brain, body, is very geared to experimentation. It's very geared to hypothesizing. So we live a very hypothesizing type lifestyle. It's all happening very fast on the unconscious level. And so we hypothesize and experimenting, and we make mistakes, but that's okay, because in a mistake, if you're managing it, you'll take the messiness and you'll repair it and you'll grow. So it's kind of experiment, mess, repair, grow, experiment, succeed, don't, then you grow. And you're kind of doing this all day long in everything that you do, relationships, work, relaxation, sport, whatever. So that process is something that we are designed to go through. The problem is that brain health is, and that'll bring brain health, and that'll bring body health, because it's mind, brain, body. But if we have a messy mind only, and we don't manage it, or we only manage it intermittently, it's because our mind's always working. It never switches off until you die. So it's working at night, you dream with your mind. You can even train yourself to dream differently. I mean, that's how powerful the mind is. You can, and I'm about to do a research experiment on that, where you can train your mind to train your brain to actually change things like nightmares and things like that, which is super interesting. Cool. So it's really interesting. So in other words, messy mind, messy brain, messy body. So that's really vital. So that would be the first thing. The second
messy
thing,
mind, messy brain, messy body.
Yeah. So it's
you can't detox the brain, or I guess you could detox the body a little bit by the physical environment, the substances you put in your body. But what I'm hearing you say is if you don't learn to detox the mind first, you won't get the optimal benefits of that environmental substances. Exactly.
So, for example, if you go and do a workout, but you go and do a workout with an attitude of, I just got to get it over and done with, or I hate this, or I wish it was over. And if never let yourself do that when you're working out, because as soon as you do, you send a message to every DNA, every part of every cell of your body to actually go into like almost like a freeze mode. You know, when people are starving and then their body hangs onto food. If you send that message to your body that you don't want to be here while you're exercising, you actually reduce your the DNA's functionality, and it drops down. Your benefit drops in the exercise routine. Wow. So you may be doing the most amazing workout, but your mind will determine the effectiveness and the benefit of the workout. So it's got to be mind, but we do have to eat properly. I mean, I've written books, Think and Eat Yourself Smart. I am an avid believer in eating healthy, and we can talk about that, real food and exercise every day. I've just come out of hot yoga 2 hours ago, and sauna, infrared saunas. I do it all. I do everything that I can do possibly, because I am looking after the organs through which my mind works. So I'm trying to create a very compatible relationship between them, because there's a magical relationship between them, which we've got
Has there ever been a time where you've been studying this for decades?
38 years.
Yeah, decades.
Nearly 40,
when you were like 6 years old, you started studying this. So was there ever a time during your intense research where you knew this, but you were practicing something different? Maybe you're eating clean and you were working out, but you were like, gosh, I don't want to be here, or I'm stressed out by this or my work or whatever it is. And you saw the negative effects of that. And then was there a time when you switched it? I'm assuming there was, and you never went back and you started to see other benefits.
Definitely. It's been up and down. I've always been very driven. So I've always been very into exercise and throwing myself into everything. So everything I do, I throw myself into 100%. But as I've gone through life experiences, I've got 4 children and they're adult children, and that comes with its own incredible joys, but incredible challenges. And as you would know, and so there's been times where even like I've been married for 34 years and we have an incredible marriage, but we've had our ups and downs. So whenever it's the relational stuff that's grabbed me the most.
Really?
And
it seems like relationships are the things that bring people the most joy and the most pain.
It's because we are enhanced by each other. And that's something we should talk about, enhancement versus competitive culture and the whole deep, meaningful relationship thing. That is such a cool, incredible concept. And it goes beyond Darwin back to Lamarckian theory and that kind of stuff. But it's really, and it does impact. So to answer, it's a great thing to discuss. So in terms of, there's been like over the years business stuff and things, but I think the thing that's affected me the most, where I find myself maybe working out at Orange Theory or something, and something's happened in a relational situation, and I find myself so absorbed with that I'm exhausted on the treadmill. I can't. So then
I focus. You don't have energy.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm just not able to do what I could normally do. So then I immediately will switch back and say, okay, I'm here now for myself for this. I can't help others unless I'm actually building my own body up. And I discipline my mind, I catch it, push it back into that mode of totally focusing on what I'm doing. And it shifts completely. Suddenly I have all the energy in the world, and there's a difference. Yeah.
Is that part of getting rid of the messy mind?
It's managing the messy mind. We never get rid of our messy mind. We need to be friends with our messy mind. It's a very nice concept.
What is the messy mind? What is it? What's it feel like?
The messy mind is the experimental mind, as I was mentioning. So basically it feels like I don't know what I'm doing, or somewhat I'm kind of like, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't know if this is right, if this is okay, if this is it's also things like someone says something to you and you react and you realize, oopsie, I said the wrong thing, or I misheard, or I made an assumption, or you see a pattern in your life where you keep on reacting to certain things, or you see that you're waking up in the morning complaining all the time. And that's messy mind. So it's where we find ourselves feeling discomfort, feeling like something's just not right, feeling ourselves irritable, worked up, all those emotions, those are messy mind, and those are totally fine. Now here, this is so fascinating because those are fine if they're managed. So what we need to do is own them, give ourselves permission to experience them, because you cannot grow unless you understand what they feel like. So get irritated. I'm not saying choose to get irritated, but if you get irritated, own it, and then say, okay, well, why did I do this? What can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? That's a managed mind. That's what our psychoneurobiology is designed to do. We're not designed to be these perfect toxic positivity creatures. We are very normal. Yeah, we're not supposed to be these. It's way better to actually get frustrated and say, oh, I'm so sorry. I got frustrated because of, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it less next time or whatever. That's so normal.
What's the difference between toxic positivity and wise mind?
Okay, so wise mind is the ability to recognize I don't know everything. I need other people. I recognize I've hurt other people. I recognize it's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. I recognize that anxiety, depression, these are signals. And when my body aches, it's telling me something. It's the wisdom to stand back and see another perspective. It's having deep discussions like this where you explore philosophy and explore. That's wise mind. It's if you asked me for advice on something, or I asked you for advice on something and you gave me advice, wise mind. When you talk to your kids and your partners or your friends and you say, hey, this happened, what do you think? And they give you advice, wise mind. So wise mind's in all of us, but we don't tune into it sufficiently. And it's at our core of our being. And we see this playing out in the neurobiology because we don't have any proteins right. Let's take it from the organs to the cells to the parts of the cell down to the subatomic particles. We have nothing in our entire physical body and brain that is for toxicity. What we have is for managing it. So that's so different. So in other words, we have grace to make mistakes. And toxic positivity is all about that kind of almost putting a Band-Aid. It's like a Band-Aid on a wound. It's one of my friends says Band-Aid on a bullet wound. You can't put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. And that's what toxic positivity is doing. And things like gratitude statements and affirmations, if used incorrectly, will are very much tools of the toxic positivity movement. But if you're not dealing with your issue, you can't just slap a positive affirmation on or a gratitude statement or practice. It's not going to do anything.
So how do
You're
you
kidding yourself?
So should we use mantras and affirmations? Is there a way to use them in a positive way, an effective way, I should say? Or
Definitely.
So
definitely.
how do we use mantras, tools, affirmations, positive attitude without it being toxic positivity?
I would do the way that I explain that is you do it in step 5 of the neurocycle. So the system I've developed for over 38 years, which is basically a delivery system for how to, it's not a technique, it's a delivery, like Amazon. Amazon's a delivery system that works brilliantly. Even if you don't like Amazon, it works. The system works. It delivers anything, anywhere, anytime. Then the concept of the neurocycle is a system of how we can directly manage our mind, or get our wise mind talking to our messy mind to direct the neuroplasticity of our brain to be able to then move in the right direction and accept the ups and downs of life and get that sense of peace, which is not toxic positivity. It's actually a sense of peace. It's an acceptance of the uncertainties of life and so on. So what I have found from my research is that if you have an issue in your life and there's something that you're battling with, so maybe it's just that you wake up complaining every morning or something. I'll take something like that because it was discussions recently I had with someone, and something I used to do. I used to wake up like worked up in the morning, and I got that under control, and it changed my life completely because it wrecks your brain, totally wrecks your brain, wrecks the day. And you can chat about that too in more detail if you want. But that's so what you've got to do is you've got to recognize that if you are in if there's something you're trying to work on, so let's say that there's a complaining thing, just by saying, okay, I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'm going to say 10 gratitude statements instead of 10 complaining statements. That's going to work for a time. It will not be sustainable because all you're doing is slapping a band-aid on a bullet wound, or you're chopping the head of the weed and it will grow back. As we know, if you go chop the head of the weed, they will grow back.
So it's not getting to the root of.
Exactly. You have to find
why don't you just feel appreciation at all times, not try to act appreciation?
That's it. It's not a being, it's a doing. And so you've got to find out why. Whatever you're doing, there's a reason, because at your core, your identity is this wired for love nature in our neurobiology and in our mind. We see that in the love waves of the physics of the mind and the gravitational fields and things. We see that literally the quantum physics has shown us that we immersed in gravitational fields that are, and they change when there's negativity. So when people are angry and fighting, it's different. When there's a lot of war, you can feel it. You can walk into a room and you can feel that stuff. So essentially our environment is this is all very deep stuff, and it's all very real stuff too. And it's not something that we can ignore because we all experience this. So you can't just go and say 10 gratitude statements. You have to find out why I am complaining. I'm showing up for a reason. There's a reason why I'm doing this. At my core, I'm this wired for love person. So if I'm waking up complaining, or if I'm always irritable in certain situations, if this triggers me all the time, or if I have certain patterns, there's a reason. Don't be hard on yourself. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself grace and just find the reason. And it's such an easier way, so much of an easier way to live, Lewis, than like beating yourself up or forcing yourself to be something else. Just say, okay, I wake up complaining. Why? And then go and solve it. And that's where you can then work through the process of solving it. And it's a very sequential time process. That's why there's 5 steps you do over time. And when you find the root, then you can do the positive affirmations. It becomes the step 5. Right. Then it works because you're actually doing it in the right place.
How do we truly heal the trauma of the past that causes a lot of our thoughts? Because I hear I'm hearing you say that I'm feeling the traumas, the memories of the past that we had from the event, and we're holding on to the memory, the idea, the thought of the event. And sometimes we and a lot of the times I would go to say, I'll speak for myself, and I'm thinking most of us probably, an event happens and our memories after decades and years build it up into something bigger and more extreme potentially than the event actually was. And we're holding on to, now our mind is coming up with memories that weren't even real that caused this reaction in us. So how do we really, is it healing the trauma of the past? Is it healing the memory of the past? Is it healing all of it? What is the process? What should we do? Is it only through therapy? Can we do it alone through journaling?
You can do it alone. You can do it with therapy. You can do it. I would never do anything completely alone. I would make sure you have some sort of support system. If you can get to therapy, it will definitely help. But therapy is a catalyst. It's not actually, and it's your place where you can unpack the pain and get the guidance for how to manage the next step. But you're still living with yourself 24/7.
You got to do the work,
You've got to do the work. And this is where having a system of mind management is so vital. So what you've described is the whole thought tree. And that thought tree, let's take the incident of what you went through as a child. And that would have been, what the actual incident would have been is the roots.
Event.
And then the event and the details and the timing and everything. And that then builds your perspective of how you viewed yourself and how you viewed this whole, which this is your emotions and the data, and that manifested in how you actually lived your life.
Yeah.
So that's a trauma from the past. There's no guilt in this, even though it's toxic, because that's all you could do to survive. It's a coping mechanism. So this toxic tree is a coping mechanism. So we've got this inbuilt thing in our mind and our brain or system that enables us, because this should wipe you out. You shouldn't even be alive, kind of thing, if you look at the natural biology. But there's this protective system in place that kind of cocoons it for a season until you're ready to deal with it. So that's, and then something will come an event will come in your life where now you have to deal with it. And sometimes we ignore that. We ignored it a few times before we do, and then eventually, so there's kind of a cocoon, so it's protective, so it is damaging, but because you're not ready to deal with it, it's not wiping you out. It's still causing problems. It's still creating a few shockwaves there in the ground and that kind of thing. But when you're ready to, then suddenly something will happen in your life, and it's slowly infiltrating. It's the slow infiltration. So it's sending out little tendrils. It's growing. That you're still surviving, but things are getting worse and worse. And eventually this cocoon starts breaking down and it explodes in your mentally, physically, in something, in a relationship, in a work environment, it builds, it cascades, and little things happen, and then eventually there's a big explosion. That's this thing, the cocoon starting to come off as you are maturing and getting older and doing more with your life and experiencing more. This has to then get sorted out. So your body gets to a point where it has to reject it. The pus has to go, for want of an awful analogy, but it's a good example. At some point, it can't stay there anymore.
Right.
And that's when it explodes. And when it explodes, these are all the memories. As you recall it, this is the concept of the abuse as a child. That's the thought. This is the detail of the story. And that's how you experienced it. And so you've got to go from those warning signals back to the data here.
How you experience it back to the actual moment. Yeah.
And then you reconceptualize. So how do you make it play out in your future? That's always part of your story. But you change how, like you've already done it. You said it earlier. You can talk about it now without falling apart. But at some point, you could not talk about it at all.
No.
And so
you rewrite the script. Yeah,
you rewrite, and that takes time. That takes these cycles of 63 days. You literally reconceptualization is rewriting the script. So eventually, this goes. You then have this, and that now, instead of being toxic, can you see some of these leaves are shining a little brighter than the others?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is that in that. It's reconceptualized. I can now talk about it. That'll make you cry, but you've now turned it into a part of you've redesigned it. It's the beautiful new space. That's how it was, but now you've made it work for you instead of against you. So that is then the trauma of the past, which is, there's no excusing that. There's no forgiveness even in that, but you need to be released. Because if you're still connected to that trauma, kept there, keeps you connected in the quantum world, literally to the abuser. So until we release, so there's a connection. So you literally, here's your brain, here's that person maybe 10,000 miles away, but because of entanglement in quantum physics, there's no space-time dimension. And because of that's a toxic entanglement, but when particles are entangled, and you may have heard of this somewhere or someone saying this, but when two particles are put in a relationship in quantum physics experiments, no matter how far apart they are shot, they still are in relationship. So this one turns this way, this one will turn this way. So until you release, until you reconceptualize, you still connected. So that will always be controlling you. So when we talk about, people say forgiveness, I think release is a better word, because how do you release? Forgive? These going through this process over time, as you reconceptualize, you're slowly cutting the ties. So so by the time it's in this format, no longer is that invisible tie there. You know that you've cut the tie when you can actually talk about it, and you're not excusing that person's behavior. That can never actually, what they've done can never be forgiven. If you think of it, but you can release it. So we talk about forgiveness as being part of a healing, but we've got to, I had this discussion with someone the other day, we've got to be very careful of using the term forgiveness loosely, because when someone's done something wrong, that wrongness, even whatever you've done wrong to someone, that wrongness is always there. What is forgiven is what should be done is we should release. We should realize that was a moment in time, it was wrong. The person needs to own it, but it's not your responsibility to make that person own it. They have to unpack that wrongness and kind of work through that. What you have to do is be released from it and to put that into your past. And that's kind of the easier thing to do, because a lot of people keep getting stuck because they think, I can't forgive. How can I forgive someone how do you forgive someone who's raped you? How does your parents forgive someone who's hurt their child? How does when someone's murdered, that, I'm not saying that you have to keep that and not, you have to release yourself from that.
Yeah.
And you have to accept that event, maybe that person was operating out of trauma. So the reason for them doing that was trauma driven. And it doesn't make it right. It makes it, but we can't ignore it. And what I think we've also tried to do with a lot of sort of psychological approaches is, forgive, especially in the religious community, forgiveness, it's all gone away. It hasn't. It's still there. It's part of your story. I think the kinsugi principle explains it the best. Do you know the kinsugi principle? The Japanese art.
Yeah, go ahead,
when a vase shatters to the ground and it's in 1,000 pieces, they don't sweep the pieces away. When you were raped as a child, your life was shattered, okay? But you didn't sweep the pieces away. What they did was they collect every piece and they meticulously rebuilt the vase with gold lacquer and platinum. So now you have this beautiful new vase with all the gold and platinum represents what you've gone through. It's enriched you, who you are as a person. Now you are helping others through your story. You are teaching others. You as a leader are one of the 3% only that are enabling others to talk about their trauma. Only 3% of leaders are talking about mental health. 3% really? Globally. That's terrible.
Wow.
So if we as leaders don't talk about it, how do we give permission to those that are following to talk about it? So as a leader, as you talk, you've now taken the kinsugi principle. You are showing us your gold cracks, the shining light in the leaves, and it's the trauma is shocking. We never forgive that. It's wrong. We can never say that's right. It's never right. But what you've done with it is right, and now you can turn it into helping others go into greatness.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of the transformation.
Wow. I'm curious, what's the process of protecting our mental health on a daily basis? It sounds like first we need to be aware of and do the process of healing the past or the traumatic memories of the past, however you want to call it. But what's the process of protecting the present and the future so that we don't fall back into a dark space that kind of keeps us there for so long?
Absolutely.
Is there a process you recommend?
There is, and it's self-regulation. It's being very, very self-regulated. We see from neuroscience, and I actually have a little quote in the book where I think I've got it. I think I actually had it open because I did it. I actually did a live on it today. But you can I can tell you what it is. Every 10 seconds, here it is. I don't know what it is. I thought I had the page open. Every 10 seconds, you can be consciously aware of what you're thinking, feeling, and choosing. Mental peace and keeping yourself in a state of mental peace comes from being aware every 10 seconds. Now, I'm not asking you to set your watch and your time on your phone. I'm just saying that translate that out. That means all the time. That when you're awake, you need to be standing back and observing your own thinking. You need to be thinking, okay, what am I thinking in this moment? How am I reacting in this moment? I wake up, I feel great. And then I read an email, I feel lousy. Or I wake up feeling on edge. Why? I'm talking to this person. How am I reacting? How am I responding? I'm doing this email. I'm doing this work. It's constantly monitoring, and that may sound exhausting, but it's not. It's the most natural thing in the world. It's one of the most brain healthy things you can do. So that's the one key, is self-regulation. As you neurocycle, as you get into the habit of neurocycling, your self-regulation skills are trained to a level where it changes your life. Honestly, if I had to say what protects my mental health, it's my increased self-regulation from constantly living a life of neurocycling. Then the other thing in the neurocycling that is phenomenal for protecting mental health, which no one speaks about, I haven't heard anyone except me speak about this, and it's called brain building. And there's a whole section in the book on brain building. And that's taking the 5 steps of the neurocycle to learn new information. As humans,
what does that mean? A new skill or a new
every day, new data. So for me, I will take my scientific research. Every day I spend at least an hour looking at neuroscientific or scientific studies related to my field of work, studying new information, the latest. So I study it to the point where I could actually give a lecture on it, or I could write an exam on it. So I take the 5 steps and I study information. Every day when you wake up, you have millions of new baby nerve cells. And nerve cells look like trees, and they are waiting for you to like lattices to strengthen the new cells, the new thoughts that you build into the neurons of your brain, these little branches, these thoughts. And if you don't use them, they become toxic waste. So that affects your sleep at the end of the day and affects your dreams. And cumulatively over time, they affect your health of your brain. So when you brain build, it's like cleaning your teeth. If you don't clean your teeth every day, eventually you're going to have a real problem with your teeth and your brain, because it's going to cause all kinds of issues in your body and so on. Same thing with brain building. Brain building builds mental and physical resilience. So by learning something, we actually think deeply. When you neurocycle to brain build, what I'm doing is getting you to think super deeply. And when you think deeply, you make all these great things happen in the brain, the left, right side, oxygen and all that stuff. And that's the only way you can actually grab those new baby dendrites. They respond to deep thinking. They don't respond to shallow thinking. They don't respond to scanning through headlines and hurry sickness and rush and data capturing and never doing anything. They respond to, scan the headlines, that interests me, let me read that article and study it as though I'm going to write an exam, or I'm reading this great book, or take my book and study it. Study that every day for an hour. You'll not only get the tools, but you'll be building your brain. Whatever, take anything you're interested in. If you love cooking, if you love whatever you are interested in, self-help books, anything. Don't just read. Study them. Use the 5 steps. Take an hour a day. If you can do more, and you will transform your mental health. All my patients, when they came into my practice, I would obviously evaluate and do all that kind of thing. We'd work out sort of where the issues were, but we would always do brain building first. Sometimes for a few sessions, I would only do brain building and get them to a state where I could recognize they're starting to get more resilient and self-regulated. Then we would start doing the trauma work and the learning disability work and the work with trauma, working with traumatic brain injury.
Sure.
And in fact, all the traumatic brain injury and stroke work that I would do with my patients, like if I was working with someone like what your dad went through, I would teach the patient and the family brain building. We would take, what are you interested in? And like if your dad was interested, let's say in whatever, let's say he was interested in, I don't know, what was your dad interested in?
He's into playing piano, singing, sports, running. Yeah.
Okay, so you could take maybe sports, and you could then use the brain building. You can do this with him now. You can take the brain building and take out sports, and you don't just read it, but you actually study it. You do the 5 steps and you study it as though you are now going to give a lecture, Dad. You're going to now teach this. That's what I would do with my patients. And then we would slowly restore function, because that changes it orders the gravitational fields, orders the brain, changes and directs the neuroplasticity, and healing comes. And you start transforming. I had CEOs of top companies in South Africa have terrible car accidents and completely lose their functionality, not be able to function. Do this brain building for over a period of time and go back and become something else. So like the one guy was an engineer but went into management and became the CEO of a huge corporation, had this terrible car accident, ended up going back and becoming a top engineer with brain damage. So I mean, like, I've had pilots that at 82 that couldn't fly anymore that have become accountants. I mean, I can tell you story after story. When I'm in the most distressed state, like that night of acute trauma that I told you about, besides the glucose monitoring, besides doing the neurocycling, what did I do? I did brain building. I sat there brain building to calm myself down in that state. So that I would shift between the management neurocycle to the brain building neurocycle.
To trying to learn and understand something, yeah.
But that built resilience, so it calmed me down. If I'm worked up, I'll go to brain building. If I'm really out of it and I'm not managing and I'm feeling like I'm getting super anxious or depressed or something, I will even go and do 10 minutes of brain building. I'll grab a study it, do the brain building, and I've immediately increased my resilience.
Does brain building only happen when you're studying and learning something, or is it more of like, okay, I'm going to play like ping pong or play a sport or do an activity to help like hand-eye coordination?
Yes, no, definitely. You can do that too. So ping pong is fantastic for the brain. Anything that really challenges the brain to coordinate is definitely going to be a brain-building exercise. So,
Got it.
Racquetball, tennis, ping pong, things that are challenging.
Sudokus, whatever, yeah.
Yeah. You can do those too. So do those. Those are more physical related. So I would balance the physical with the mental, so that you do the cognitive as well. I mean, both are mental. I shouldn't say that. Text and physical. Make sure that your brain build with a combination.
You know, I feel like a lot of parents in general don't have the tools to have conversations with their kids around mental health. You know, I don't remember much of my parents, although they're amazing. I don't remember us talking about mental health and these challenges that might arise, these emotions and these feelings that might arise for us at different times, in the ways of how to manage it properly, as like the tools that are now being discovered and researched like you have today. What conversations should parents be having with their kids around mental health in order to make them feel safe, seen, and loved, with the confusion that they have maybe as teenagers or young adults in today's world?
I love your question, and it's so important. We should be doing this from babies. So when a child comes home from school and they may be 3 or 4 years old and they're sad, they don't have the language, but to be able to actually notice and validate. I see you feeling sad. Why are you sad? And give them toys to be able to act it out. The older they get, never overlook a child's emotion. Always validate. I see you sad. Do you want to talk about it? I see you. So it's I see you. Do you notice I'm saying I see you? And you can find your own wording of that, but it's to acknowledge, which validates, and never to judge or say, oh, you don't need to feel like that. What parents do a lot unintentionally, I'm a parent of 4, I did it even with all my knowledge. I have, so we make mental messes. I say we make mental messes all the time, but it's very important not, your child comes to you and says, I'm really worried. And then you say, what are you worried about? I'm worried about this one doing something that you think is totally irrelevant. Oh, that's not so bad. You don't have to worry about that. That is the worst thing you can do to a child, because what you've done is invalidate something that for them is, now they feel shame. So now they've got this confusion of worry. They don't know how to process it. And you know what parents do that
and you haven't accepted their feelings or their thoughts.
That's it. So it's very important, even if you don't think that it's valid, you're not helping them saying, and I know it's done often with the intention of, oh, it's not so bad, it'll be okay. Calm down. Don't do that. It's rather sit down and embrace it. Say, okay, let's talk about how you're feeling. Why do you think you go through the 5 steps? I've actually got in my Neurocycle app, I've got a whole thing on how to use neurocycling for children. And I've written books in the past, but now we're doing the updated versions of neurocycling for Rainy Tots, neurocycling for young kids, teenagers, whatever. So exactly how to have the conversations. But it's openness. One of the things that I have as a parent, and I've worked with I used to do a lot of family therapy when I practice, and as the advice I always gave parents, and that I've tried to apply as much as possible, if you don't want to talk about of depression. And it was quite an interesting way of phrasing it. And my response to that was, well, help them process it. If they're a professor of depression, what can you learn from them? If you feel that they are so good at depression, that's a symptom or a signal of something going on. You need to acknowledge that and say, I see you feeling depressed. Can you explain more? And then work through get those, the 5 steps, work through it systematically. You can use a lot of visuals with kids. I've been doing this with kids when I was practicing and training in schools and things as young as 3. And I would take the brain. Listen, 3-year-olds respond to this. They will, and I'll say, this is in your brain, and we'll take a tree. Okay, so now this is the happy tree, the sad tree. And you work through, okay, what are you feeling? What's the sad? Give me, and you give them the words, and then let's see, what are you doing? And you work through systematically through the process, and you say, okay, so this is where it's coming. And it might take a few days, so it's the same process, but you're orientating them to their level. And then what you're doing is you're modeling what to do. At the same time, don't hide your feelings as a parent. There's so much.
Don't act perfect.
No, because it's in the mess that they see European grow. Mess is how they learn. So you make a mess, you get mad at your child for no reason, and then you feel guilt and condemnation. Don't do that. If you get mad, explain why you're mad. Say, I'm really mad, I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing, I didn't mean to do that. This is why I did it. But this thing that we mustn't let a child grow up, oh, you're the mother, you chose to have me, therefore you've got to be perfect, and if you fail, you've messed up my life forever. That's not healthy for a child, and that's what happens. And it's bad for the parent and the child.
Yeah.
And or the parents pretending, oh no, everything's fine, and meanwhile behind closed doors, you and your husband are having a huge fight, or you and your wife are having. That's so confusing. When my husband and I have an argument, the kids grew up knowing why. We explained, okay, we were wrong, we shouldn't have said this. This is why we argued, and this is our solution. And it's that authenticity and that honesty, and you know what, they may not like it always because it can be quite scary, but life is scary, and you've got to give people, your kids, the tools to know that, hey, this is how I'm managing it, and I'm an adult and I still battle. So when they're an adult and they're battling, they don't think, oh gosh, I'm an adult, I'm supposed to be like my mother who was perfect. No, my mother still cries, my dad still gets upset, but they've got a management plan. So it's that authenticity and honesty. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. I'm curious about the identity check then. What does an identity check look like, and how do we build our identity to become more confident, resilient, loving, energetic human beings?
Absolutely. So when identity shatters, we'll see a difference in the vibrations in the brain. We'll see a difference in the energy flow in the brain.
What's the common ways it shatters? Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
A breakup,
nurture, environment, experience.
Something happens, a death in the family, something.
Those will shatter, but it's more when you are told you're broken in some way, even if it's not direct. So it's like if someone tells you, you've gone through an adverse circumstance and you're feeling depressed, and someone tells you you've got a brain disease, that will shatter your identity, because now your identity is, oh, I'm broken, I'm a broken brain, I'm a useless person. Or if someone feels they're not valued, so a statement is made that the core of their humanity, who they are, is not valued, they're not valuable enough. We see this a lot with gender issues, people that aren't allowed to identify with what they believe their gender is. Tremendous attack on identity. That's why there's such an increase in suicides in that kind of environment. Generally, I've worked with a lot of suicide survivors and a lot of families of suicide victims, and who've experienced suicide in their family. And the core is identity, because if you don't feel you're valued, if you feel that what I can bring to the table isn't enough, no matter what, why should I even be alive? And that for me is so important. I did a whole podcast recently on identity and the importance of identity, and it looks different in the brain. When your identity shatters, your energy, we can pick that up on the QEEG. QEEG technology doesn't read detail. It's very crude, but it does give you an idea of the level of anxiety it creates. So when you're not being yourself, or you feel that you're not valued, we will see asymmetry, for example, in the brain. We'll see a lot of low energy in the front of the brain, very, very low energy in the front of the brain. We see it with people that have been labeled. Their energy, blood flow, it's asymmetrical, and it's very low in particularly this part of the brain. And then we have 200 specializations across our brain that are unique to each of us. So it's designed because your brain's only limited in size, your skull's limited in size. So you can't keep growing your brain. So you can't do everything, nor can I. So there's something you can do that no one else can do. And that's within these 200 specializations of our brain. But it creates a need, because Lewis says stuff you can do that I can't do. So therefore I need you, and you need me, because of what we can, because that's enhancement. And when people think, okay, there isn't something I can contribute, their identity gets broken. So we see that in those changes, and when you get that change in the brain activity and inflammation and blood flow, we're going to see an increase in the immune system inflammation. The immune system will respond and react, because now your survival is threatened. So you're going to get inflammation. Then that has a downstream effect in your endocrine system. Then your telomeres and your chromosomes start getting shortened, which then ages your body. And I mean, it's I can go on and on.
It goes on and on, yeah.
The neurophysiological effects are enormous. So an identity check is critical, because the only way you're going to bounce back from what is going to happen, because life is traumatic, no matter what we would love to know, we would love the world to be perfect. The reality is, no matter what, you've had traumas and you will have trauma. That's just, it's inevitable. So in order,
what does the identity check look like for you? You say you do it once a year, or?
Yeah, I do it once a year whenever I feel that I'm out of sync. If I start feeling like, and a very quick recognition of identity check is if you're starting to feel envious and jealous of others, and if you're starting to feel that something that you're just not good enough, imposter syndrome, the typical those are very key. That, hey, I must stop and do an identity check. So then I do it with a neurocycle. I'll go and look for all I'll go and gather awareness of all the signals signals that I'm starting to see, like this. Okay, there's a lot more imposter syndrome than normal, because we all get a level of it, so it's okay. It's when it becomes an invasive pattern. So you look for the invasive pattern signals that are affecting who I feel about myself. And so I know how to recognize the general unease, and then you'll start working through from the signals, and then start reflecting what's happened. Ask, answer, and discuss with yourself what's happened to get myself to this point. And then I'll take time to write it down. The third and fourth step, it's describing the neurocycle now. The third and fourth step are writing. The third step you write in the form of a metacog. And a metacog is one of the most powerful things out there to get into your non-conscious mind and find out what's really going on, to really tap into the wise mind. You want to get your conscious and unconscious mind talking to each other. And if you go through these 5 steps that I'm describing, the neurocycle sequentially, you are training and forcing blood flow, those 200 areas of specialization, the different structures of the brain, the neurons, the neurochemistry, the endocrines. You are forcing it to actually work for you. You're kind of making all the ducks line up in a row, if that makes sense. Yeah. And when you're in that state, you're much more intelligent, you're much wiser, you have more clarity, you have more perspective. So that's the objective of the 5 steps, to really give you that level of clarity that can help you dive down deep into an unconscious mind and find the toxic issue that's caused this identity issue, because it's going to affect everything. Your identity starts shattering. It affects your work, your relationships, your
mood,
view of
your
life,
energy, everything.
Mood, energy, exercise, diet, everything.
So step 1 is reflection of your identity, is what it sounds like.
Very important.
A lot of these things. It's interesting you're saying this, because when I was younger, I've said this on the show a few times, but when I was younger, probably like 7, 8, 9, I would get, in elementary school, I would get in trouble a lot. Or at least this is the stories I remember. I remember getting in trouble and being sent to the principal's office. Maybe not that much. Maybe, I don't know, half a dozen times or something, right? In a couple of years. For whatever reason, acting out or saying something, and I remember kind of being scolded or being told that I was doing something wrong by the principal. And I remember saying vividly, like, I wish I were dead. Like, I just remember saying this as a kid over and over. Like, when I would get in trouble, I was like, I wish I were dead. And hearing you say this now, I feel like I just never felt valued. I'm sure people valued me, but I think I didn't know how to receive it, or I didn't feel it. And I think, thankfully, I never said that after those years, and I don't feel that anymore. But I remember, if I would have went down that path of never feeling valued for 5, 10, 20 more years, I don't know why I don't know why I'd still be here. I don't know why I wouldn't. I'd be building a case of what's the point of my life? Why should I be here? No one cares about me. No one values me. No one sees me. No one acknowledges me. I'm pointless. I'm worthless. I have no meaning, so I might as well end it. And so I have a lot of, I guess, compassion for people that feel that, because you can kind of get sucked into it, and you could easily get sucked into it from a major breakdown or breakup or heartache or something. You can get kind of sucked into this. Well, I don't matter if this person doesn't love me, and I don't matter if I'm not good enough for this job, and I don't matter. We can kind of get sucked in if we're not taking care of our mindset, from what I'm hearing.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. And it's you reflect so many people that have gone through that, and you managed to kind of adjust. But the fact that you could actually recall that incident shows you that it's still, maybe now there'll be more healing, but it impacted your life. And how many kids go through that? In fact, there was a post that I put up a couple of days ago, and I just happened to scan through, because you get so many comments. I try and read as many as I can, but I don't. But one caught my attention, and it was literally what you're saying now. It was someone saying how they were, as a child, told that, you're not good enough, and, you have a bad attitude. And it was just like disciplining a child without, and what we don't realize is when you do that to a child, you're actually breaking them. And I remember my mom saying to me, my mom comes up with this thing, saying to me that when I would tell my kids, hey, listen, that's not right, but you do this right. This is the good, but this is what, and it's not you, but what you're doing. So it wasn't, and I was so emphatic on trying to, and I don't know if I did it every time, and I'd have to go ask my kids, but I really was conscious of not saying it's you that's bad, you're amazing.
This action that you did, the behavior is not good, but
yes, that's separation.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother watching me doing this one time, and she said, why are you doing that? Why are you telling them if they've done something wrong that they're good? I said, because they are good. They're at their core. They're just learning. They're just experimenting. If you're constantly
telling a child all the things they're doing wrong, they're going to believe they're wrong.
Exactly. That's the perspective that they're building, because you the adult in their life, you the caregiver, you the person that they look up to the most, and you're shaping them. And so they're relying on you to model behavior. So if you are modeling back to them all the time that they are bad, instead of saying, okay, you're doing this, there's a reason why. And that's what I used to always do with the patients in my practice when parents and I was helping with behavior, because I worked with a lot of adolescents that were behavioral juvenile delinquents and that kind of thing. I'd always explain it like this. The way you turn up, or the way you are, what you're saying and what you're doing, are simply signals of an underlying issue. It's not the person. You can't say little Johnny is a behavior problem. That's a terrible thing to say, because you've shattered that child's and they'll just think, oh, what's the point? I may as well live up to what they're telling me I am.
There must be more of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So we've got to be so careful that maybe a person, oh, you're always so aggressive. When you say you always, you never, those you actually
you're building an identity.
Exactly.
You're shaping an identity, and the person's becoming more of that identity.
And you're not giving them any skills to change. So, but if you rather say to them, okay, what you've done is actually pretty aggressive. I know that's not who you are. Let's see why you did that, because there's a reason why you did that. And honestly, Liz, I cannot tell you how many times I've been saying this recently. We've got to give people grace. We've got to give ourselves grace. If someone in your environment or your work environment or your family are being impossible or difficult or whatever, instead of getting mad at them, remove yourself, create a boundary, but change your perspective. There's a reason. There's a reason why they're like that. So get yourself in a safe place that you can actually process it, and that you get your own mental health under control, and then go back in and try and say, okay, look, that really hurts me, the way you do this, but I understand that this is not who you are. Yeah. Can I help you, get through this? Is there something that's going on? And that shifts things totally. Because you're immersing people in kindness, which is something I did a podcast on recently. It changes, that kind of thing changes the way that the brain functions immediately in both parties. And you can get to the core issue. And that goes back to the child. You can do the same thing with a child. You don't have to then break their identity. So kids are growing into adulthood. There's so many bad behavioral issues that have come out of generations of bad parenting. And I'm much older than you, I think. I don't know how old you are, but I'm 57. How old are you?
I'm 38.
I'm 20 years almost older than you. Okay, so my parents parented me in a very different way, where it was very much, head ostrich in the sand mentality. Children are seen and not heard. Don't pull yourself together, get up and keep going, hide your emotions, don't show the emotions to the world.
That's so hard when you're developing a child brain that is developing. It's hard to manage your emotions.
Exactly. So I'm part of the baby boomer generation, and we grew up like this, and that's where you see a lot of issues in the baby boomer generation. And a lot of us have carried that on with our own kids, and hopefully, I didn't, because I recognize and I'm doing the work. Thank God I'm doing what I'm doing, so I could change that. But that has created a whole breed of people, and if we don't change that, we then impact the next generation and the next generation. So we have to, you've got to be able to express yourself. And one of the things when I was working in therapy with doing a lot of family therapy, I would tell the parents that you've got to be authentic. You've got to explain, hey, I'm sad today. Mom's sad, and it's okay to be sad. And this is why I think I'm sad, and I'm working on it, and I'll be better. So you've modeled now for a child that you said, that child, if a parent is sad or worked up or irritated or angry or snappy, and you don't explain to a child, the child will immediately think, I'm bad. Their identity gets attacked. So if you don't explain to the child why their identity is affected, and then they think, okay, that adults are perfect. So a sad adult means that I'm the bad person, the adult's the good person. And that's the worst lie out. All of us are a mess, no matter what age you are, adult or child. You just happen to be an older version of being a mess, and there's hopefully some growth. And what we should do is model authenticity and say, I am sad today, or I am depressed today, or yes, I yelled at you, I'm sorry, that was wrong, it's my bad, I did it because of this. So then you model to the child that say, oh, okay, it's okay if I get mad. Then they start saying, Mom, I'm mad because, instead of I am mad is my identity. It's not mad is my identity, mad's what I'm doing. So it's a doing, not a being.
It's interesting because this morning I woke up and I was feeling a little sadness, and I didn't know why. And I remember thinking, okay, let me just sit with this for a minute, and I don't need to stay here, but I can be here and reflect on it. And I remember it was just kind of like chatting with a friend. I was like, yeah, I'm just kind of feeling sad. I don't really know why. Maybe I'm feeling like a little I went through a transition in a relationship lately, and I'm like, maybe I'm, a little bit of sadness from that and missing this experience. And I was like, okay, but there's a reason why the transition happened. And even though I'm grateful that, for the lessons and the process of moving on from this relationship, I can still be sad for the loss of something, something something that's not there anymore that was there at one point. And so I just kind of sat with it for 20, 30 minutes, and I was like, okay, but I don't need to stay here, because staying in sadness is not going to support my joy, my authenticity, my vision of helping people. So I want to make sure that I don't reject these range of emotions, but I also don't want to stay in the negative, not a negative emotion, but the emotion that maybe will hold me back from helping people or having a positive attitude. So I think it's
so good. You just did. Sorry, I didn't.
Go ahead.
You just did a neurocycle. You basically
by
gathered
switching the language.
Yeah, you did. You gathered awareness of your sadness. You embraced it. You were okay with it. You gave yourself permission, and it's so good, because it's really okay to be sad. It's so totally normal. Then you reflected. So you gathered awareness. You then reflected on why. You maybe didn't do the writing steps, but you visualized it. So
I was talking with someone about it.
So you talk. So you did. So there we go. So there's kind of the writing. If it comes up again, you could maybe try and do a metacog, and you didn't get to finishing that. But the different types of writing just can take you deeper if you need to. But you basically did that as a visual discussion, and then you got into it. You reconceptualized it. You said, okay, there's a reason you're sad, the breakup, you're moving on, and then it's okay to be sad, because it's you grieving the loss, and that's part of it, and now you're moving on. And so your first step was you've accepted it, but now you're moving on, and you're quite right that so you've given that sadness, you embraced, processed, and you reconceptualized. So you turned if you pushed it down, it would have grown, because whatever you suppress will get bigger, and then it's going to permeate other parts of your life, and then there's confusion, because you think, why am I sad when all this is happening, and then why am I feeling this, and it ends like a little virus, just starts spreading. And so you caught it there, and you allowed yourself, but you also limited. And it's so important with any emotion, no emotion is bad. Every emotion is telling us a story, but there's certain emotions that make us tired. Our brain, body, and conscious mind are limited in energy. The non-conscious mind is unlimited in energy. So the non-conscious mind will keep driving us to just keep going. So we have to discipline, or we have to literally create a discipline, almost like boundaries between the conscious and the non-conscious. So we have to so our wise mind is saying, okay, your wise mind said, if I stay in sadness, I'm going to get drained. You instinctively recognize.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was your wise mind telling you. So you put a cap and you put a seal on it. And I always say that with the neurocycle, when you're going through the process and you're working through a 63-day cycle, you sit for 15 to 45 minutes, not longer. And you limit, and you have an active reach, which is then what you did. You reconceptualize, and you said, okay, well, I'm moving on. I had a moment of sadness because I'm grieving what's happened, and that's okay. So if you're during the course of the day, if you found yourself going back to sadness, you can, instead of allowing yourself to go and revisit the whole transition, you can go to that statement, and you can build on that statement of, it's okay to be sad. I'm grieving a loss. And that's part of it. And then you move on. So you're training your mind to discipline itself, not to stay in something that will drain you, but to see how you made it work for you. Because you can't change what's happened to you, but you just change what happens in you.
What does the neuroscience say behind positive thinking versus negative or toxic thinking? And I think I don't know what the stat is. It's 60,000 thoughts a day or something like that we have, and 80 or 90% of them are the same recurring thoughts. I'm probably off there, but something like that.
No, there's a lot of stuff like that out there, and you're not far off in terms of what the media is saying. In terms of the people, I follow people that are heavy into understanding the numbers of, from a very neuroscientific perspective, and I've done my own calculations. We build around about 8,000 to 10,000 thoughts a day. So we're building. So that's sort of how many events we experience. It could be more. These are very, 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 very average numbers. It really is. So it's somewhere between 8 and 18,000 that we build. So we build in response to what we experience. So whatever's new is built. But then to build, you also have the thoughts popping up. So at any one moment, so we can work in 10-second blocks. That's what neuroscience shows us, just to give you some kind of tangible thing to hang on to. In any 1 10-second moment, you can literally have anything from 1 to 13 thoughts that will move from the non-conscious, and maybe more, and in as well, and also build a couple of thoughts in that thought with one thought, but with multiple, maybe 100 memories in that. So that's 120 odd things happening in any 10-second block.
Wow.
And multiply that by 60 seconds, or times 6, so in 1 minute. So you can already see the numbers as they multiply. So that's where we get anywhere between 8,000 we build, and then probably about another 10,000 are coming up. So 18,000 seems to be a more, but whatever the number is, it doesn't really matter. It's a lot.
We have a lot of thoughts.
We have a lot of...
And a lot of them are more negative, it seems like, right?
Not necessarily. If you look over, the only reason it feels like that is because the negative get more attention, not because they are... not because you're wired that way, but because they have created complete disruption in your brain. So we see
it's stronger physical reaction, right?
And you got to get rid of it. It's against your survival. So you're going to pay attention to whatever's threatening your survival. Think of it. If someone's at your front door and they're trying to bash your front door down, and you've got your family to protect, you're going to pay attention. You're not going to sit and watch TV. You're going to pay attention to what's a threat to your survival. That's why So it's not that we have more negative thoughts.
When we're relaxed and calm, we're not thinking, I need to fix this. We're just relaxing and hanging out. But it's when there's a thought that's negative, we put a lot of attention on it.
Exactly. It's the big tree in the forest. It's where whatever you think about the most will grow. So you may have, if this huge infinite forest of green, the strip through the middle is the wise mind that can't ever change. The majority is green. Small trees, big trees. And you're going to have clusters of the black in between. Some people will have more because they've had more abuse. As I said, 30, 40%, well, 20, 30% of the population, depending on where you are in which country, would have more experience more trauma, socioeconomic, abuse, war, etc. So war-torn countries will find more PTSD, a higher percentage than in somewhere like a less war-torn country and that kind of thing. But on average, the forest is mainly green, but whatever's getting the most attention in your life, if you're living in war-torn something, or if you're living in an abusive situation, or you're living with a bullying boss, or you're living under the threat of someone in your family who's really ill, that's what's going to dominate. So it's not that we have more negative thoughts, it's because that is survival. It's threatening our survival. It's creating brain damage. We've got to get rid of it. We've got to manage it. It's a call to management. Paying attention to the toxic is a call to management. It's created disruptions in the gravitational field. Think of those. I need to get an image. There's a movie, and I don't know which one it is, but it's those. You get that ripple effect. It's moving through like a field or something, and you can almost, they create with the movies. They create that ripple effect. Mm-hmm. Do you know what can you visualize something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what's happening with the mind. So we've got these ripples. It's not just trees that are standing still. There's these ripples, but every now and then that ripple is toxic. So it's going to be very disruptive, and that sends out this. It upsets the balance in the non-conscious mind, and it's linked to a physical. So this gravitational field wave disruption storm is linked to one of these in the physical brain. So it's in the storms there, somewhere there. So maybe it's there, and then it's also there, this thing in there. So those are linked, and those are threatening your survival. So they will get your attention, and your attention is to go fix. So if we suppress...
So if we suppress in terms of what? Not pay attention, not be aware, medicate, take drugs, drink, do porn, whatever the addiction is to cope, as opposed to address it, what happens?
Well, so essentially, I'm glad you brought that up. So addiction is not a disease. We're not caught by the chemical, and the chemicals do change your brain. I've just explained that, but your mind can override any biological change because your mind's more powerful than your brain. And that's how you can always draw on that internal survival instinct, which is that internal strip of green trees, just for the analogy's sake. So addiction isn't a disease. Addiction is a response, like depression. It's a warning signal. It's trying to take something that's painful and taking something to numb the pain. So as you said, the sex, the pornography, the alcohol, the drugs, the smoking, So you often find, exactly. So if you find someone who, I was talking to someone yesterday who had a tremendous battle with cocaine and alcohol, but it wasn't that those had grabbed them. We get the impression that, your brain's diseased, therefore you're vulnerable to those and you can't control it. Nonsense. That's taken all the hope. People are dying from lack of hope, Lewis. That's what that statistic I spoke about earlier, the reversal of trends. People are dying from lack of hope, deaths of despair. When you take away people's sense of agency, you're taking away the most core dynamic of who you are as a human. Your mind is all about agency. Think, feel, choose. You control that. And you remove that agency from someone by saying, hey, you can't control the fact that you're addicted to alcohol or that you're addicted to. That's terrible. But if you say, okay, I see that is where you're finding your coping strategy at the moment, that having the alcohol is numbing the pain, having the the pornography, the repeated whatever, the abuse of anything to hide it, the opioid addiction. It's just to numb the pain. So once a person is in a loving, supportive environment where they can start seeing that change, then they can start seeing why. Then you can take them through the process of, okay, well, let's see, maybe that signal has got a cause, and let's start finding. And when you start working through the neurocycle, I can tell you now, most of the time they're still addicted to something because the pain's so bad, and they're denying this is a disease because it's easier to accept that initially, but they're denying, no, I'm not addicted to alcohol, I'm not addicted to whatever, the cocaine, I'm not addicted. But once you start lovingly showing them, okay, well, let's talk about, forget about the substance. Let's talk about you, what's going on, what's happened. And when you start doing that, then I'm depressed and this, and then the things start coming up. And as soon as you start getting that cycle happening, then the person is more able to say, oh, I see, I've been trying to numb my pain. And then you can start getting the release. 86 to 93% of people that are addicted get out of addiction through choice. And that choice is stimulated by a super supportive, loving environment that helps people to see what's going on, because it's very hard to face that stuff. So we can live in a state of denial. And so that's what takes a lot of good supportive and good therapy and good environments, supportive environments. But to tell someone, I'm always an addict, is one of the worst things you can say. You're saying, okay, you have no power.
Right. I'm a victim to this chemical imbalance or whatever it might be. Yeah.
But that's not the case, and it may take you years. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day who was, as I said, a cocaine, battling with all kinds of stuff, and now is one of the most amazing people, helping other people, doing the most incredible work. That person had been raped multiple times as a child. Came from a very wealthy family, and a babysitter who looked after him when parents were so busy working was repeatedly raping this child through his childhood, and then it happened again at university and this and that, in different work environments and in different parts of the world when he traveled to the different parts of the world. And that's where, so he had to get to the point where he realized he was numbing the pain, so can you see, we have to shift the narrative.
Absolutely.
That this is, these are extreme cases, but there's also the day-to-day. We've got to live with ourselves. Someone the other day said to me, well, that's all and well, relationship, big extreme. What about just sitting here with myself? And I can't sleep at night, and I'm worrying about, the things that I can still get through life, but I'm ruminating and I'm overthinking and I'm stuck in anger, and that too. We've got to manage all of that.
Man, that was 25 years of my life, because I talked about being sexually abused when I was 5 and having anger and resentment and frustration and rage for 25 years until I actually started opening up and talking about it, until I did therapy, until I did
EMDR and
I did every type of therapeutic experience I could do, and it really truly gave me the environment of love, support, and peace to begin the path of setting me free, setting the pain and the trauma free by giving it a voice, by expressing it, by doing the work. And it didn't happen overnight. It's 8 years later, it's still an ongoing thing of healing and
it will be.
Yeah, it's much easier, and I can have a conversation about it with ease, where 8 years ago I would, be crying talking about it.
So XY. That's the X plus Y equals XY. You've reconceptualized.
Right.
You're able to talk. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's what you've done. You've been neurocycling without knowing it. Now, if you formally start neurocycling, if you start a daily program, you're going to start unwiring it even more. You're going to get even more control over the accumulation of all the things that happened. That's just what I would recommend, that you try it out.
For sure. So. It's so what should we be thinking when toxic thoughts about ourselves? I'm not good enough. I'll never amount to anything. I shouldn't try this. This person doesn't like me. drama, stress, anxiety, whatever it is, when we have a toxic thought that doesn't support our dreams, that doesn't support the betterment of our future and our vision, what should we be thinking in terms of replacing that, in terms of the process? Or is that something we shouldn't be rejecting negative thoughts? We should be analyzing and being aware, but how do we do it without consuming our life?
Okay, so you kind of answered the question, the second part. That's what you do. The only way to get control is to embrace and to process and reconceptualize. And you do it in a very accepting manner. So it's like get into the helicopter and be the messy pilot.
Follow
and
the steps,
be the
yeah.
co-pilot. Yeah, and get into that state of mind, because then it's very non-judgmental. That you start by telling yourself, like, the very first thing as you're getting in the helicopter, whichever point when you're in, is to say, it's okay. It's okay. There's been 1 billion people who have been in the same position as you that are battling. In fact, most people battle with self-esteem. It's very few people that don't, for some reason, battle with self-esteem. For example, just take that example, or thinking I can't do this, or I am ashamed. Because every toxic experience we have completely rips at the core of who we are. And the core of who we are is, I'm needed, I'm valuable, and I have something to contribute to the world that no one else can contribute. So when someone tries to take that away from you through an abuse, or that has attacked the core of you, so you kind of hide amongst shame. And self-esteem comes out of this, I shouldn't be feeling this. But especially a young child, like 5, to be abused, you don't know how to process that. So the most immediate thing is, because it's so against survival, because the adult in your life who's supposed to be the protector, everything's distorted. You don't have the language, you don't have the brain power yet, the mind power yet to process. So your coping strategy will be, well, this made me feel bad, so I am bad. So you tend to have this a pervasiveness. Sexual trauma tends to create a pervasiveness of shame, and that comes out in all kinds of behavioral manifestations, whether it's withdrawal, whether it's being difficult, aggressive, and it's pervasive, and that attacks self-esteem, because something at the core of who you are has been attacked. And that's why it takes time, as you spoke about, to go back and find that. So in terms of what do you say to someone, the first thing is to get to the point where we have to change our narrative. We have to forget what the world said about all these scary words and see those as very helpful. It's a complete 90-degree or 360-degree change. Despair, anxiety, shame, thinking I am shame, thinking I have no self-esteem, thinking I can't do this, that's okay. Because as soon as you say that's okay, as soon as you can admit you're feeling that, you've controlled it. You've now, from a
You've got power back. Yeah.
You've got the power back. You've shifted the power balance. So instead of, if this is now in the non-conscious, it's this trauma, it's the 5-year-old, it's gone through the years, whatever, and there's been this, and I'm not saying you did this, but there may have been a period that you suppressed because you didn't know how to process it till maybe 15, 16, 17, when you were getting more metacognitively able and started seeing things. Maybe it was older. Very often it hits around between 18, 22, where early childhood trauma, where we start seeing those patterns manifesting and a bit of awareness coming. So now that when this comes into consciousness, in the brain, this thing is now weakened. So these protein branches, which are the memories and the emotions, the data of the event, which was that,
Right.
is now weakened. So the minute I, through my tears, say, okay, I feel shame. I feel like I've got no self-esteem. I feel like I'm useless and I'm ugly and I'm this and I'm that and I can't ever achieve anything. The minute I can accept that, I can look at that objectively, pilot, co-pilot, and the co-pilot can say, what do you feel? I feel, okay, let's now see if that's real. And that whole calm, just the way I'm speaking, calm, it's okay, own it, it's fine, it's okay. Now we can fix it. That's weakened these chemical bonds, protein bonds. I've started changing the structure in my brain. I've now shifted 1,400 neurophysiological responses to work for me instead of against me. I've now started recreating balance in the brain. I've increased blood flow. So I'm setting myself up to be more resilient, to do the very hard work of unpacking. And it gets worse before it gets better. And the one of the really good things that I have presented in my work and in this book is to know that scientifically I've shown that even if you feel worse, which you will when you unpack this and you start seeing stuff that you've suppressed, it's terrible. It's heartbreaking. It can make you feel like you just want to die.
That's how I felt. When I started talking about it, I was like, this is the scariest, hardest thing that I've ever done. I'd almost rather die. Like, it's the feeling that you have. You're like, if anyone ever knew these things about me, if I had to truly face these things, it's the most scary, challenging thing I've ever emotionally had to deal with. And it feels like you're dying.
Dying.
I don't know.
Like you're dying. Yeah,
maybe that's too extreme. Maybe that's too extreme, but I think you're thinking or feeling like I'm going to die because if I process this and if people knew this about me, how could they ever accept me? How could they ever love me? I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. Like your mind, my mind went through these thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's like no meaning and there's no purpose and what can you do? And it's a waste of time and I can't live with myself like this and it's so terrible and I can't do this. And then you start rejecting people around you or you make wrong decisions. It's totally normal. That is normal. You need to accept that about the process. It will get worse before it gets better and that's okay. And that's totally what you've gone through is normal and we can't go and label that and medicate that. Then I invalidate your experience. By you being able to talk about your experience, this format of having a podcast where around the world now where people are being much more vulnerable and opening, it's bringing this into the open and it's enabling us to then be able to weaken that. You've shifted the power balance and it does get worse. As you said, you want to die. It's so bad. But then the shift starts happening because look where you are today. A shift happens at some point when it really gets down, where you may even have tried to commit suicide or you may even have got to the point where this is it, I'm out of here, or something traumatic, really traumatic, and then you suddenly, there's that shift, there's that awareness, and then you can start rebuilding. And that is a time process, and that shift is real. So what you asked me about, what would you say to someone who's in that state? Where do you start? You start by giving yourself permission. Yeah. You start by getting into the co-pilot pilot seat, by letting that pilot fly like a maniac. And, crash the plane, it's a time capsule, you can get that plane going again. But helping, leaning on the power and the comfort of the co-pilot to say, I'm really scared of that. I don't want to land my plane. So you land, but I will. And you land your plane. And there you take out your spades and you start the process of getting to eventually digging this whole thing up, and slowly as you're ready. That's why I say 15 to 45 minutes a day. You don't do longer. You do a little bit at a time and you do as many cycles as you need, and eventually it gets to the point where you have reconceptualized.
I just feel like so many years of my life where I would stay in sadness, anger, resentment, what if statements, where I would just ruminate on these emotions for days, weeks, months, years. And it only left me with a lack of sleep, with stress, frustration, overwhelmed, never feeling good enough, asking why me, all these things. And I never felt peace when I stayed in the emotion and I allowed it to consume me, as opposed to be a momentary or an hour thing, as opposed to days, weeks, months things. So
you literally had to rewire your brain, because we get into patterns of allowing ourselves to do that ruminating. And I can honestly relate to what you're saying. I did it too. And, as I've learned more and more and done more and more research in this area, yes, I've got an advantage because I'm seeing it directly with the research I'm doing. But it's just so freeing. You get so much mental peace when you recognize, okay, I'm in that state. And yes, you can have a concern in your life. You can have a concern that is, you're not just going to not think about a transition and a breakup. There's going to be a lot of time that you spend on that because it's different processing, but it's how you do it. Each little moment, is it a rumination on a hamster wheel, or is it a growth, a messy repair, hypothesizing, messy repair? Are you moving forward? And that's what's so good, because if you get stuck like in the if only, like you said, and those negative emotions, we're creating so much neurochemical chaos in our brain and our body, and we're increasing inflammation, we're aging our body, we're just stuck doing everything we shouldn't be doing. And we don't have to. That's staying in the messy mind. The wise mind catches that and disciplines and trains it. But it's also not going to happen overnight. And that's where people in this technological age think, okay, well, I've done it once. Why am I still doing it? No, you're going to have to. It's going to take you probably 9 weeks. If you had to actually look at the time you spent to break that cycle, which meant that you rewired your brain, it would have, it's weeks. And if you have breaks in between.
Months or back in the day when I had to go through that,
Yeah, absolutely. Multiple cycles. And that's why.
What's interesting? It was like 8 years ago is when everything started to really shift for me, when I turned 30. Because I don't know if I mentioned this in our last interview, but I've talked about it on the show a lot, where I started to truly address and heal the root cause of a lot of my pain, anger, resentment from sexual trauma that I went through as a kid, from other things that happened that I never expressed, that I never brought to the surface, that I always kept hidden with shame and insecurity and frustration or anger. And when I started to process the root causes of a lot of my insecurity and shame, that's when everything started to rewire. So if I would have just said, okay, I'm going to process these things on a surface level for a certain amount of days, I don't think I would have ever found that ability to create that peace within, because I was always holding on to some type of trauma that I was unwilling to talk about. Whether it was a big T or a little t, I was unwilling to talk about it out of shame. And when I started to share it, it was freeing. And I'm not saying everyone needs to share these things publicly or whatever, but just talking to a friend or a therapist or a coach, it was allowing me to start rewiring. Okay, I can process these heartbreaks or these tragedies or these moments in life that bring me stress and pain and grief and sadness. I now don't need to hold on to this pain from my whole life and add to it. I can process it and move on.
That's beautiful. That's amazing that you did that. And it's interesting that you did that around your 30s, and your 20s were fairly turbulent in terms of trying to suppress.
My whole life was turbulent, but until 30. I mean, still in my 30s, it's been some ups and downs, but I've been able to process, and I've been able to emotionally have more tools to experience and process and not hold on to. And I think I'm still learning, because I'm going to be learning for a long time. But
it'll be your whole life.
I'm definitely not perfect, because I still make a lot of mistakes, and I still stay in things longer than I should, and want to make sure I give it my all, and all those things. But I think I've gotten to a place where I know when to walk away from scenarios, as opposed to be the perfectionist, make sure I do whatever it takes to work. Like I'm like, okay, if this situation isn't supporting me or the other person, like at some point we gotta transition the situation. So.
Oh, that's incredible. And you've done so much incredible work then. You've literally, I can explain to you scientifically if you're interested in what you've actually done, because I think what you've gone through, the story you've gone through is, like, especially having the sexual trauma as a young, how old were you again?
5.
That's like, you think of it like this: as a 5-year-old, you look at your caregivers and your environment as your heroes, as your people that look after you. So the distortion is so absolutely, it's just such a distortion. So what's happened, if I use my toxic tree, and for those that are listening, I'm holding up the wiry toxic tree that represents toxic thought, as opposed to the healthy green tree. The roots over here, this whole thing's falling apart. I should pull the plastic off. The root part over here is the source of the pain. So that's the source of the trauma. So that's the actual events, all the data, the emotions,
the memories.
The memories. So a thought is made of memories, root memories and branch memories. And so the memories are all the things that actually happened, and all the emotions that went along with it, the full data. As it's happening, simultaneously we interpret what's happening. And then if there's repeated patterns that happen, this part over here, the branches, are your interpretation. So you said things like shame, and what were the other words you used? You used
insecurity, shame, anger, resentful,
and seeing yourself. Your identity was broken because you didn't see yourself as having value. All those kinds of things because of that complete distortion. Now, as a 5-year-old, you cannot process this. So this was the way you cope. This always is the balance to that. And even though this is a distortion, you do this to balance that. I mean, it's healthy, it's all great, it works out because the you-ness comes out. But here, this is all not the you-ness. So that would account for when you were at school, maybe you were called to the principal's office. A lot of those behaviors would have come from you not valuing yourself. And then if them coming in heavy again, just added more fuel to it. It was just another layer added
more
on.
Anger, more frustration, more, everything.
Yeah. So instead of them looking at why Lewis is doing this, they just told you were wrong and punished you. That would be the worst thing in your situation. And that would have just made it worse and worse. So then we push that down because we don't know what it is, what to do with it. And so you just keep going on and you just keep hoping for the best, and our kids just seem to be so resilient. But this is building and building. So in your non-conscious mind, these thoughts that we have, these experiences that we have, are building through our mind into our brain and into our body and into our mind. So this is not only a thought tree in your brain, it's also in the DNA of every cell of your body. And it's in the gravitational fields of your mind. So it's in 3 places. That's why it's this whole psychoneurobiological impact. That's why it's this whole effect that it has on us. It's a whole body experience. So when you do things like EMDR therapy, did you ever do EMDR therapy or any?
I've heard great things about it. I haven't tried that yet.
So when you you've done a bit of therapy over the years.
I've done a bunch of different therapies
things,
emotional intelligence experiences and workshops and
which have helped to pull the stuff from your body to your brain into your mind. So we work both ways. You get from body, brain, mind, brain, body, and your net kind of all works back and forth. But if these aren't dealt with, they get suppressed, and then maybe only when you're 30, like you said, then you started actually doing the work, or maybe during your 20s. I don't know when you started first remembering the trauma. I'm not sure what age you were at when you started facing that.
Every day I remembered the trauma and thought about it, but it wasn't until 30 when I had the courage to start talking about it.
Okay, so it was in the so what you had was the situation of some people completely hide and they don't even know what happened. Then it suddenly comes back. You were constantly.
I was always.
You were living it all the time. Okay, so it was in
daily, or maybe not every day, but at once a week I probably thought about it.
Okay, so this was constantly moving from the non-conscious to the conscious. So the awareness was increasing. So when we have increased awareness but no management and no processing,
there's got to be a way to get it out somehow.
Exactly. So it's coming up, but you're not processing. So it keeps coming up, down. Each time it goes back down stronger than before. And we see when you have increased awareness without processing, it increases anxiety in the brain. So if we had to scan your brain at that time, we would have seen a lot of red pockets of high beta energy across your brain, which would have made you be quite edgy, like looking for things to constantly like keep you busy, distractions on the go, whatever. I don't know exactly what you did over that time, but you may have been just always trying to, you said perfectionism, always trying to achieve. You're trying to prove yourself in a way.
Of course, constantly. Yeah, I mean, I threw it into sports, so I was just playing sports all day, practicing, trying to get better and achieve my goals.
And then that would have given you a lot of release of adrenaline.
Absolutely, anger, frustration, everything.
You channeled into the energy, so it's almost like you use that to cope, almost like an addiction, but in a sense it was a coping mechanism, because addiction is not a disease, it's purely a coping mechanism. It's a coping signal that you're trying to deal with the stuff
of something that hasn't been healed yet.
Exactly what it is, because 86 to 98%, 95% of addicts get out of addiction through choice once they are ready to do the work to find the root cause. So you channeled for a time into that energy. You also got things like anandamide being released in your brain, which would have given you the bliss hormone, would have given you a sense of excitement, and you would have had dopamine rushes and all the things that were being drained. So this was draining all of that. So you're doing sport to put it back, but eventually it explodes. So it's like a volcano. If you think of a volcano,
then sport ended. So I was like, well, what? Channel my energy. That's when everything started to come to the surface, where I was like, oh,
you got to deal with this now.
I'm not liking my personality in these scenarios when I'm feeling triggered, and people aren't liking my personality around me, and it wasn't fun anymore to be around me for a year or two, when I was like, really? I don't know how to express myself. I know happy and angry. Like, I don't have a range of emotions. Like, how do I learn how to express? And I think and I empathize for a lot of humans, but I mean men in general who are kind of built and raised in the same type of dynamic. I'm like, it's when you've never been taught how to express yourself without being shamed, without being made wrong, without being like, don't do that. That's not okay. You can't show this emotion. You're supposed to be a man, or this, or whatever it is.
Toxic masculinity.
For women as well. Like, you need to be this, this, and this, and you can't do this. It's just a challenge, because then you're always suppressing something.
It's always suppressing, and you have to go back and that's volcanic in nature, because like a volcano will bubble, eventually explode, and the lava will pour out. That's what these eventually do. They eventually, and it did explode, as you've just described. It was exploding in your behavior, where it was now becoming very in your face, and in people's faces, and that was then signal. So all of those behavior patterns, the emotions, the behaviors, the perspective on life that you had, the physical sensations in your body, those were all warning signals that your body was trying to restore balance. So your non-conscious mind was trying to draw your attention to the fact that you need to identify the source. Your immune system was sending out all kinds of signals to this actual physical experience in your brain, this physical thought in your brain, your body, trying to get rid of it. So it's trying to eject and get rid of this thing that's causing the imbalance, and it comes out in our emotions and our behaviors.
Well, it also comes out physically. I mean, I was going through a challenging scenario where I knew a relationship that I was in needed to end, but I was staying in this certain relationship for longer than it needed to be, and I started to get, I never in my life have had this, but I started to get like eczema breakouts on my skin in different parts of my body, and I was like, what is this? And I was
Wow.
like, never had this in my life. I started doing all the allergy tests. I had no allergies. I was like, maybe I'm having too much almond butter or freaking, I don't know, gluten. What is it?
Yeah,
Dairy? Is
what
it
is
gluten?
it? Yeah.
Eliminating all these foods, nothing is changing. And I'm like, well, maybe it's just, I'm just going to live with this forever then. And okay. And literally, I kid you not, once this, the dynamic of the relationship shifted and transitioned, my body had, it's going away. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like the physical symptoms is gone. This eczema outbreak or
Amazing.
whatever, which I thought was going to keep spreading all over my body, it's now gone. And it's crazy when we, like you're saying, we need to be aware of the signals. We need to be aware of the emotions, the feelings, the frustrations, the thoughts, the sadness, the anger, and be aware of them. And we also be aware of our physical symptoms.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
am I drained? Am I emotionally tired? Am I frustrated and triggered all the time? Do I have eczema? Is my hair falling out? I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever. Am I losing
Yeah.
my vision? Like something.
Exactly.
Am I getting
Yeah.
heart palpitations? Like you've got to be noticing the physical symptoms as well from the emotional stress.
Exactly. That is so important what you've said, and fascinating that you've got, that you've highlighted a key psychoneurobiological link. And in my most recent book, the Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, that one that you interviewed me about last time, there I talk about some of the things. I didn't put my whole clinical trial, but I talk about some of those impacts. But there's so many studies around the link between unmanaged mind and unmanaged stress and the impact on our body. So it's directly like this. You were going through this relationship that was not good for you. You hadn't dealt with these issues yet properly. So that combination was your mind was an unmanaged mess, and that would generate a lot of basically toxic energy waves, gravitational fields, electromagnetic fields, literally through your brain and your body. So therefore, nothing you would have had too much high gamma, too much high beta, probably not enough oxygen and blood in your brain, constricted blood vessels around your heart, all things that the immune system would have been autoimmune, because that's eczema is an autoimmune response. Everything was, so we've all got genetic weaknesses, and generally when we're under toxic stress, and it's come through the generations, it just happens, it's mutations that happen through generations, and they're dormant and they're activated, and the mind is the activating factor. So it manifests in so many different ways. So definitely you've hit the nail on the head. You go for the allergy test, it's not the allergies, because we immediately think purely physical, but the physical is dominated by the mind. The physical, you don't have any, you can't have eczema if you're dead. You can only have it if you're alive, and generally if it's not a food allergy, there is a mind, an undealt with
mental
adverse.
allergy.
Exactly.
The mental
That's
allergies.
literally mental allergies. These are literally mental allergies, and they threaten your survival. So that eczema was your body saying, "Hey, Lewis, please pay attention. There's something in your mind that you need to deal with." And it's
interesting because I take full responsibility for my thoughts and staying in something that I know I'm not supposed to stay in something. Or for not speaking up, or for abandoning myself. As I reflect, and throughout the entire time, I'm in no place to blame someone else. I take responsibility. Take responsibility for what am I doing to be a co-creator in this? What are my thoughts doing to manifest this physically? And how am I responsible for choosing something different? And it might be a hard decision. It might be a courageous decision that I've been afraid to make, but that's the one my body is telling me you need to make, or you need to shift. You need to shift something. You need to shift something within this relationship experience. You need to, whatever it might be.
Something.
And I think a lot of times people will blame others for their feelings, their emotions, their physical manifestations of their mind. And maybe they're a part of that experience, but you can't blame someone else for the way you're thinking and you're feeling, or can we?
You've hit the nail on the head. You can't, there's two parts to that answer. Our environment affects us. Yes. So when you were abused, you were a victim. There's no lesson to be learned in that victim that what you went through as a victim. There's only healing that needs to take place. And that's what you are responsible for, is your healing. And that's always sounds so hard when someone's been sexually abused, to say that you're responsible for your healing. But
no one else can heal me.
No, people can support you. That's the difference. And that's that whole enhancement culture. We need each other. So you need someone cheering you along. You need the therapy, the coaching, the counseling, whatever version of that, whatever combination of that. But you also need to know how to manage your own mind, because at the end of the day, you're not in therapy 24/7. You're not in coaching 24/7. People go to sleep. You're awake at night. You wake up with your mind. You're sitting with your anxiety, your thoughts. What do you do? So mind management becomes absolutely essential in us being able to cope with anything that we've gone through. And yes, that is we can't change. I keep saying it. We can't change what's happened to us, but we can change what's happened in us. So that abuse that you went through, there's never anything that can excuse that. And there's no lesson to be learned. And you were a victim, and that person was wrong and needs to be, and person or persons, they need to be punished. And those are facts. Those are facts. But for you to be disengaged from that is extremely important. And the only way you can disengage from that is through embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing. So it's a deconstruction, reconstruction process. Otherwise, you keep this in your brain, and this drives you and it controls you, like it did for so many years. Every day, this was controlling you, coming up and controlling you. So until you did the work which you did to start recognizing those signals, the physical signals in your body, the eczema, whatever it was at that time, the heart palpitations, gut issues, the emotional signals, depression, anxiety, panic, frustration, whatever, worry, the perspective signals. How are you looking at life? What is your general view of life? And then also looking at which one have I left out? The physical, emotional is 4. Emotional, physical, perspective, and why am I blanking on the 4th one? There's 4 different areas that we look at. It'll come back in a moment.
Sure.
So once we gather awareness of those signals, then what we do is we can then start, once we've gathered awareness, we can then start doing the reflection, the why. But you've got to do it very sequentially. You first got to pay attention. So the signals are warning signals. They're clues. So you become a detective in your own life.
Well, why is this happening? Okay, let me start doing some experiments. Let me get some tests done and realize, okay, I'm eliminating this, I'm eliminating that. Then where's the root cause
of that thing? So you've got to start there, but you've got to start with your signals. So these are the 4: emotional, what you're doing, behavioral, physical, what's in your body, and perspective. Okay, so emotional, physical, behavioral, and perspective. And you've got to find those first. As soon as you're aware, you then pull this up and you change 1,400 neurophysiological responses in your brain and your body. You shift the resilience of your brain, and you start now enabling yourself to be stronger to face that stuff. And your mind, brain, and body know it's going to be hard, because treatment and healing is awful. It's hard. It gets worse. I put a case study in my book of one of the subjects who was in the beginning of the study. They literally said, "I am depression." That was their identity.
Wow.
And all they could describe.
I'm depressed. I am depression.
I am depression. Yeah.
Oh,
I am depression, and I can't sleep. My life, the whole narrative was just everything that was terrible. They had tried everything, every drug. They were at the end of their rope. By within 21 days of mind management, they were no longer saying, "I am depressed." They were saying, they were no longer saying, "I am depression." They were saying, "I am depressed because of." And that is major. And then they said, so this is now, they understood now, they were saying depression is a signal. It's telling me something. Then they said something so interesting. They said, "I'm even more depressed and even more anxious than I was when I started the trial." And I said, "Yeah, that's a good thing, isn't it?" And they said, "Yes, because the depression and anxiety is different. Because the depression and anxiety shows me I've done the work, because now I know why I was depressed." They had suppressed for nearly 30 years. What had happened was also sexual trauma and a lot of physical abuse. And it had been so bad that they pushed it down and completely obliterated it from their memories. And that was coming up. So that just remembering what happened made them more anxious and more depressed. But it was a different it was a controlled depression. It wasn't a depression of, I'm hopeless. I can't do anything. There's no meaning. It was, I now know why I'm depressed, and this is what I can do. And then by 63 days, because it takes a full 9 weeks to start changing behavior, they were sleeping again. They were able to get back to work. They were able to start seeing, okay, well, I found this part. Now I need to go back in and find this part and this part and this part. So there is now a plan in place for managing their mind and knowing what to do during the day when it hit them. That terrible, and you can probably relate to this, that terrible, like how it grips you, that sadness or that anxiety or that panic attack out of the blue, just an all-consuming, or someone just says something to you that looks at you funny and your whole identity is shattered. And you're triggered. So that is key. And that is why we've got to we've got to think, if we've been thinking a certain way for so many years because of an experience or an accumulation of experiences, you're going to have to do the work of unwiring it. And to unwire, you have to get control. So by gathering awareness of your signals, which is the very first step, you are then bringing this into the conscious awareness and you weaken it. And that's really key. And I'm holding up the wiring tree for the listeners. You then weaken the toxic thought. As soon as you weaken the toxic thought, you have now got agency or control. You still feel depressed. You still feel confused. You still feel all those things, but there's a shift. And the shift is that now you are taking control. You're empowered. And Lewis, I used to tell my patients, get 2 chairs, put 2 chairs next to each other, sit in one, and that's the wise mind. And the other one is you, messy mind. And you are talk to yourself and use the pronoun you, and give yourself therapy and create an environment that you would love, which is kindness, grace, acceptance. And it's okay. Everything you do, and you keep telling yourself, you really are at your, I always give them the science of saying, listen, neurobiologically, you're wired for love. Your mind is an optimism bias. When you feel this negative toxicity, this is simply your body trying to restore balance. There's nothing about you that's bad. It's what's happened to you that's an adverse circumstance, and you've just tried to cope. So your behaviors are simply coping signals. So when you keep telling yourself that, and then you work through very systematically through the 5 steps, you're getting more and more control. You're using mind-directed thinking to direct the neuroplasticity of your brain that changes. So you rewire your brain slowly, and it's not a quick process. It's a slow, deliberate process over 63 days. So in the first 21 days, it's 15 to 45 minutes. Then the second phase of 42 days, you're just going to spend 1 to 7 minutes. And that cycle, and I've tracked this now all with brain studies and blood and DNA, and I've used so many different levels of studies, and we're busy publishing all these papers at the moment, but there's a summary in the book, and I've got a white paper on my website, and we're doing a national study now. But what I wanted to show people was that taking this attitude, this kind of picture I've just painted of what you did with yourself, basically, and I'm just giving you more specifics, you are actually directing the neuroplasticity of your brain. You are taking this toxic tree, you are deconstructing it, you're taking the energy that is vibrating in those branches, holding your interpretation of yourself, which is not the truth. You're taking that trauma that happened to you, and you're changing all of that. And energy is never lost. And this is all energy in these proteins. And it's only transferred. So you're taking that slowly every day, and you're transferring, and this is getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker, and you're building a healthy reconceptualized version. So by day 21, you've got this beautiful healthy green tree. Now watch, I'm going to pull a part of it out. I'm pulling a tiny little piece of it out. There's a little piece of green that I'm holding. That is that converted into this. It's now shrunk into a green version, which is your very terrible, sad story, which still makes you sad, still makes you cry. Should never have happened, but it did happen. But you've now changed what it looks like in you. It's no longer this toxic thing that's causing your immune system to send out T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes and macrophages and treat it in the same way as the COVID virus, which is damaging your brain and body, whatever. It's literally the same thing it's not the same as COVID virus, but it's also protein. So it's recognized as a threat to survival by the immune system in the same way COVID virus is. And you've changed that. And now no longer is it a threat to your survival. You now have a new coping mechanism. So you remember why. So when you're triggered, this is what you revert to, not that toxic tree. But to get to the point where you revert to this, the green tree, you have to do that extra 42 days of work, because habits only form in those cycles. And I'd have patients, Lewis, that would sometimes take 2 years to get to the point where they were kind of had sorted out all this stuff. Some people will do one cycle, there's no cookie cutter, anything. This is not a technique. All I'm giving you is how you get your mind under control so that you can unwire these things and rewire them. And it's different for everyone's narrative. But you can do it. It's hopeful. We can do this, and it's hard work, and it's difficult, and it's traumatic, and you need support. And there's times where you're going to get so depressed where you maybe can't get out of bed for a few days because of just the awareness of what's happened. But you will keep. That's all progress. And I remember having patients that were had gone from suicidal to ups and downs to seeming to cope to back together, then suddenly crashing into deep depressions, and then everything is progress, because at every stage there's another level of awareness, and then getting to the point, okay, I can cope, I can move forward now, I can start, which is what you did.
Right. Yeah.
You've done that. Now you've channeled all that energy into helping others.
it's
amazing.
all a process. It's all a process, and there's always going to be new lessons to learn, I'm assuming. And
oh yeah, it's that messy grow. It's that messy repair grow. Messy repair grow. Messy.
right,
Give ourselves permission. It's okay to be messy. It's okay to be depressed and anxious. It's not an illness. You're not a broken brain. You are just, those are all signals. Be Poirot. Be Sherlock Holmes. Be your own thought detective.
there's so many things I want to make sure we go over still, but I want to go into relationships in a future episode, in a future interview. So if you want us to, so leave a comment on the YouTube channel and just put #relationship. If you want us to do another interview about the brain connection in intimate relationships and how that affects our mood and energy and all those things, I think it'd be fascinating. So leave a comment there if you guys are interested. I want to go over brain building. I also want to go over what you do for the ultimate mindset training in your morning and evening routine to set yourself up for success for a day. But I also I also want to go back into identity check and
we didn't quite finish that.
Figure out what do you do when you are checking your identity, and how do you reprogram your mind to build confidence in your identity moving forward?
Okay, so where do you want to start? There's 3 things there.
What do you do when you're doing a
identity check?
What are you doing personally? What does that look like?
For me, okay.
Start there.
So I tune into, once again, the signals. So I'll be going along and I suddenly notice, for me, I've got certain key signals that tell me I need to do an identity check. One is imposter syndrome. When I start feeling like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be talking about what I'm talking, I don't even know what I'm talking about, kind of thing, then I know that that's nonsense, because I've got 38 years of research and I know what I am, and I don't know everything, but so I have to, so as soon as I start feeling like that I will say, okay, that's, and I watch it, then I watch. So I watch for imposter syndrome. I watch if I start getting perfectionistic, if I'm feeling like this obsession to be perfectionistic. If I start feeling, if I like maybe hear if I start feel little bursts of, it's not like jealousy or envy or bitterness, if any of those, I mean, I own it all. I'm not scared to tell people if I have those, because it's so normal to have those. What's not normal is to keep them. I'd never see imposter syndrome, perfectionism, jealousy, envy. I never see those as evil, terrible things and I'm now a bad person. I only ever see myself showing up as those because of something. And so those are my key things. If I start feeling little twinges of envy or jealousy or imposter syndrome or perfectionism, then I know, okay, so there's, and then I watch. Is there a pattern? How often am I doing it? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it just now and then? If it's now and then, I'm okay. But if I see, okay, hey, this is happening daily and I'm being triggered by everything. So I look for frequency. So I know my signals, then I look for frequency. Then I say, all right, now it's time. This is happening way too often. I need an identity check. I need to sit down, and then I will actually sit for 63 days every day. And I do it while I'm always working on something. So if I see it's an identity check, I'll finish whatever I'm working on, and then I'll start. And I always do my neurocycle for anything when I'm getting ready in the morning. It's just the routine I've set up in my life. So it's so then while I'm getting ready, it always takes me about half an hour or so. So it's great time. No one comes in the bathroom. That everyone knows. That's leave mom alone. That's leave me alone. That's when I have my space. So I have a routine. So then I'll start with, let's say it's day 1. I'll say, okay, those are, I'm seeing I'm doing imposter syndrome. I see the 4 signals. Then I break it down. Okay, what are the emotional signals? What are my feelings? So I'm feeling a bit of envy, a bit of jealousy, a bit of frustration, whatever. Then I'll say, okay, behavior. What am I doing? I'm definitely not smiling as much. Maybe, so I look at my behaviors. I seem to be a bit short. I keep talking about this. It's coming into conversations. People are actually commenting, why do you keep talking about this? So I look at my behaviors. So emotional warning signals and behavioral warning signals. Then I will look at my body. I'll sense my body. What's different? Wow, I'm getting more gut aches. My gut, we have such a genetic weakness in our family with gut, very common. I'll notice that foods that don't really make me bloat, suddenly I'm bloating more. I'm suddenly getting incredible cramps in my lower colon. I know immediately there's a certain pain that I get in my colon that is related to emotions.
Oh, man.
I get tremendous pain in my heart when I'm very toxically stressed. Like it really feels like pain. It's sore. I can feel it's pain. Oh. So I notice those things. So I'm very aware. Then I'll look at my perspective. And my perspective is, why am I doing this or something? So it's kind of in a negative, it's moving to a negative zone. So I gather those, but I gather them, Lewis, like I'm gathering apples in an apple orchard. So I literally will do, I do. I literally, in my mind, I am 2 chairs. I'm using the you language. I'm very kind to myself. I'm very accepting. I set myself up correctly. So my whole mindset going into, even before I gather those 4 signals, is one of, it's okay. You really are amazing. There's no one can do what you can do. So a little bit of, motivational boosting, but I'm also kind to myself. It's really okay. It's really not, you're not the first person who've done this to feel envy or jealousy. This is not that you're a bad person. There's a reason. So I just remind myself of those things. There's a couple of little prompts that changes my neurophysiology. I know from the science that I've done that I've now got 1,400 neurophysiological responses working for me. Just before I start the process, I'll do a brain preparation. And in my app, I actually do this. I physically walk you through audio, video.
What's the app called again?
Neurocycle. It's called Neurocycle. And it's on, and I've got one for identity in there. So it's the whole 63-day process. I literally give you therapy. And then we have mini neurocycles. It's a mini neurocycle guide. So like if you're feeling imposter syndrome, you can press that. I'll give you a neurocycle. Identity check. I do. Anxiety,
that's
whatever.
Cool.
So yeah, it's really cool. We're growing it all the time, and I'm building in a neurocycle lab so people can actually get coaching and get coached through different issues, which is fun. So then I'll do a bit of brain preparation. So I set myself up, the kindness, all that stuff, and then I'll do a bit of brain preparation. I love to do the 10-second pause. I write about that in my book, and that's just a very common breathing technique, but I do it with quite a lot of difference. I breathe in very deeply for 7 counts, 3 counts, very deeply, like the yoga kind of breathing where you really move your belly, Wim Hof type, breathe, where your chest is, and then you breathe out for 7 counts. But it's also that sort of yoga type breathing where you push. You've got to really whoosh it out. The extended exhale pushes oxygen to the front of your brain and blood flow to the front of your brain. So I almost have to shake my head because I feel lightheaded. So that's how intensely I do it. Then I'll do the first couple just breathing. Then I add a cognitive dimension, and I start saying, think, feel in the inhalation, and then choose in the exhalation. And I do it out loud. So I add in the verbal component to the actual physical. So now I've created not just a physiological response, but I've brought mind, brain, and body. I've brought all 3 responses together. So I've calmed down neurochemistry, I've calmed down blood flow, I've increased blood flow to the brain. I mean, I can go on and on and on. I've just given my telomeres a boost, which are the ends of chromosomes. I mean, it's just my immune system's now primed. I've given my whole body the message, it's okay. You don't have to be now making stress work for me and not against me. So even my blood vessels around my heart would have dilated, and that I would have got more blood flow to my brain. So immediately I'll feel less pain in my heart, immediately, because I've now calmed my whole body down. Because that pain that I feel in my heart is coming from the trauma that's in my mind, the identity trauma in my mind. Anyway, so then I go into the 5 steps. And then I'll go gather those things like I told you, the 4 different areas, emotional, physical, behavioral, perspective. Then I go very distinctly to step 2. And the gathering is like picking apples off a tree. So I don't go stand under the apple tree and just let all these things fall on my head. That's totally overwhelming. I stand back. So visualize yourself standing back and selecting. And I do what I can on that day. Sometimes I can only pick maybe just envy that day, and maybe just not smiling as much, and maybe just perspective seem that I seem to be a bit down or negative, things that I'm not as hopeful, because I'm a very kind of positive, hopeful person, but it's not there. So maybe I could just handle a bit. I don't force myself to do too much on one day. And then I'll go to, once I've gathered, then I take each thing and now I'm going to reflect, ask, answer, discuss. What does this mean? Why? And I discuss and ask. So I'm starting to find the meaning. Then I'll write it down. So either I do it in a metacog, and a metacog I started talking about earlier on. A metacog is a way of organizing information that looks like a tree. I mean, literally. Like a tree grows branches and another branch and another branch. Every branch is connected to something else. You grow branches on a piece of paper, and on each branch you write a word or a couple of words or a little phrase. But nothing's floating on the page. This is so important. And you start in the center and you just build. You can either go clockwise or anti-clockwise, whatever you want to do. You can keep it all clockwise and turn your page, whatever you want. Lewis, I developed a system about 38 years ago, and I've constantly improved it. I would do this with my patients. I would work with people, for example, with personality disorders, and using the metacog technique, they would be able to see the different personalities and reintegrate them and find the trauma source and that kind of stuff. To get your conscious mind working with your non-conscious, to find all the trillions of thoughts that are in your non-conscious mind where they're stored to get that depth, because your conscious mind is only working when you're awake, but your non-conscious mind is working 24/7. So it forces these 5 steps going into the metacog, which is the third step, force this integration and this connection between the conscious and the non-conscious. So then I start writing down what I've gathered and what I've reflected on. But in this metacog, so it's a mess. It's just like words all over the place. And you literally vomit it on your page and you start seeing things that you can't believe that you, I mean, every time I do it, I'm astounded at what I see. Then the fourth step is a recheck. And then I'll go and sit down and I'll look at, take color and I'll look at what am I saying here? What does this mean? And I try and get order. I look for triggers and patterns and antidotes. Big thing is antidotes. That's reconceptualizing. You said that's an antidote or reconceptualized statement earlier on when you spoke about this morning the sadness that you felt, and you said you gave yourself permission to feel the sadness, and your antidote, your reconceptualized version was, it's okay, I'm feeling sad because this is a transition in my life and it's okay to feel that. And then you moved on into the day. That's what you look for in step 4. You look for what is the antidote? Yes, you're feeling this because of this. And you start, so as you go through those stages, you start seeing the reasons why, especially step 3 starts pulling that reason, the root of why I have this identity thing. And you start seeing, wow, I thought I had dealt with that, but I haven't. This is still an issue. I still need that approval because of this. Why do I need that approval? Do I really? And then you start saying, actually, I don't because of this. So step 5, then that builds into step 5, which is then a little statement that I'll hang on to for the day. And that's where your gratitude statement or your positive affirmation or your whatever, summary of what you've achieved that day. It could be as simple as, okay, my identity's been knocked. I'm feeling this envy. It's okay to feel that. And maybe that's your statement. It's okay to feel this. I'm finding the reason why. And that may be all that you do. So in the app, I would type in, it allows you to type in your active reach reminder. You set it to go 7 times in the day because there's research shows that if you can see something consciously be prompted 7 times at least during the day, you then are putting energy to the positive and taking it from the negative. And so you're transferring, you're weakening this and you're getting the healthier one stronger. So you're weakening the toxic, making the healthier one stronger. So I'm now re-energizing and I'm disciplining. Big thing is disciplining my mind, not to go back and give energy to the toxic pathway, but to actually take energy from it so it weakens.
Just because you have a certain memory today doesn't mean that experience, good or bad, will remain good or bad. Our positive vibe right now can be made negative. Our negative vibe right now can be made positive as we look back at our day to day.
Really?
So when you see memory that way, then you say, okay, wait a second.